Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching What If Emotionless ANBU Naruto became Jounin Sensei. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
He had known something was different about him for as long as he could remember. He was neither stupid nor blind. When he was younger, he had observed how the other kids had gone shopping with their parents, played in the park, attended school to learn whatever it was they taught there, and a host of other small activities that he had never engaged in. And even then, as he gazed upon their joyful faces, he felt nothing but cool indifference, not anger or jealousy. At that moment, he realized that he was genuinely different, not because he had never done any of those things, but rather because he didn't care that he hadn't. Even though he may not have been an expert in psychology, he nonetheless knew that he should have felt something. And he didn't feel anything despite this realization. He just accepted that that was who he was. Although he was a little curious, he was happy with his life and didn't really see why he would want to be like the other kids playing contentedly under their parents' watchful eyes. He only realized how different he was from people around him a few years later. Sincerely, he had found his curse, gift, and burden, but he was still unsure of how to categorize the creature that had become his unwilling tenant. He was sitting in his room meditating as his sensei had taught him after a long training day. But unlike the numerous times he had performed this specific exercise in the past, something new had occurred. Initially, it had seemed like a distant thought, a long, forgotten recollection. It had grown more powerful as he concentrated on it, changing from a vague recollection to a presence in the recesses of his thoughts. Before he could pull back, the world around him bled into black and all he could see was a set of looming, rusted bars standing menacingly in front of him. Eventually, it had transformed into a towering conflagration of feelings and thoughts that were different from his own. He had experienced a range of emotions for the first time in his comparatively brief life. All of these new feelings that were thrown at him at once, confusion, surprise, awe, and even fear, were nearly too much for him to handle, and he fell to his knees when his legs were no longer able to sustain his body. He knew intellectually what the creature in front of him was, and the 9 long tails behind it were a dead giveaway, waving like some sort of raging inferno. He had been informed that the creature had passed away years prior, so he was a little perplexed as to why he was seeing it. On a much deeper level, though, he felt something very different and saw, no, something like this cannot be seen. Power was the issue. Unadulterated, unbridled, uncontrollable power, and he was filled with wonder at the sight of the big, red, silted eyes looking down at him. Unfortunately, that awe was short-lived because despite its immense power, it remained a mindless beast that could only roar and flail around in its cage. And he experienced sympathy. No, he did not feel sympathy, for the first time in his life. To be honest, he had no idea what he was feeling, perhaps sadness, but that was a word too general. Perhaps he felt empathy because he recognized himself in the fox. He was working on becoming strong and powerful, but he saw something almost godlike in strength but still just a mindless beast in front of him. He wondered if that would happen to him, if he would eventually grow so strong that he would resemble the beast in the cage in front of him and experience fear for the first time. Shortly after arriving at this unsettling conclusion, he went back to his room as though nothing had happened before. He discussed what he had witnessed with one of his senseis and discovered how different he was as a result. He was the human sacrifice known as the Kyuubi no Kitsune's Jinchuriki, which was used to shield the villagers from the fury of the great beast. All of this was accurate in multiple ways. He was aware that his life was anything but typical, that he was receiving more rigorous training than other kids his age, that he was being held to higher standards than others, that he was being molded and shaped into a tool the village could use to defend itself, and that, in a sense, he was once more being sacrificed for the benefit of the village and its residents. No, he wasn't a moron. He had already witnessed what was happening before meeting the Kyuubi, and this realization merely provided context for his life. And he was okay with that. He would be their shield, their sword, or whatever else they needed him for. However, the lesson he had learned from his encounter with the fox would never leave him, and he made a commitment to himself that he would never become like that. He would always have a purpose in this world, and if he ever lost it, he would make it his mission to find a new one. He had indeed learned his lesson. There would always be a purpose for him to exist, even if he had to burn the world to ash in order to discover it, regardless of what he had to do or become. On days like these, he felt the full impact of his nearly 70 years of life, and he was genuinely envious of his forebears, who had all lost their lives protecting the village at a young age. None of them had the time to reflect on their lives, acknowledge all of their errors, and feel regret for the actions they had to take to keep their village safe. Yet not him. He had served in this capacity for over half of his life, and as he grew older, he began to reflect more and more on his life. Yes, there was a good time. He had pleasant memories of his Genin days, even though they weren't the most tranquil. He was young, the world was unfamiliar to him, and most importantly, he followed his sensei's instructions. There were no concerns about the dubious ethics of his chosen field, and he was not burdened with excessive responsibility from which he was no longer even able to flee his own house. More than anything, he wished that life could have remained simple because it had never been that way before. However, that isn't how things are in reality. He had matured and his impression of the world had changed, replacing his youthful naivete with a sense of fatalistic realism. Ninja were by definition compelled to give up their honor, and frequently much more, for the benefit of their village, and as Hokage, he occasionally had to make that choice on their behalf. The harmless file on the desk in front of him was the object of that thought. After all, it was hardly the first time he had read one, and there was nothing especially noteworthy or even classified about it. At least once a year, all ninja, but especially Anbu, had to undergo a psychological evaluation. But it was the report's topic that had made Sarutobi feel his age every day. Every time he saw the boy's face, read his name, or spoke to him, he was struck with regret, almost overwhelming regret. He was his biggest mistake, and he regretted it more than anything else in his life, even more than the affair with his disloyal pupil. Returning to the psychological report, he had read it before and found nothing new, but that did not make it any easier to read. A concerning detachment from his surroundings. He knew that he had at least a few. Almost total emotional detachment, but there was at least some hope on that front. Although it was close enough for him, he wasn't sure if he would use the word friends. The list was endless. A total lack of empathy. He was pleased to report that the boy still exhibited some emotion, albeit it was so subtly muted that no one else could pick it up. However, Sarutobi was most concerned about his disconnection from the outside world. One did not become an S-class nin at 13 without the ability to support his claims, and in all honesty, he could probably count the number of people who might have a chance against the boy on the one hand, and he had no doubts that as the years passed, that number would steadily drop until the boy truly became peerless. After all, a ninja with no ties to his village was almost certain to go missing nin eventually, and for someone like Naruto, the fear of being hunted was not even a deterrent. He needed to take control of this situation because he had allowed the council to control the boy's life for too long. He would be devastated if he lost one of his ninjas to the stupidity of the elderly idiots down the hall. Even if it meant protecting the village from itself, it was his responsibility to keep it safe. The only thing left to ask was, what in hell was he going to do? How did you undo years of deeply rooted behavior? For the sake of his sleep cycle, he put down his pen, turned his char to the large window in the back of his office, stared out over the village he had given so much for, and focused all of his mental processes on the problem that was Uzumaki Naruto. He knew that this problem would keep him up at night until he found a solution. He was sitting on the roof of ANBU headquarters, gazing up at the night sky. He had always been attracted to the night sky, but he wasn't sure why. But even though he didn't know why, he was aware that this was one of the few places in the world where he could find even a brief moment of peace. A world that was becoming increasingly incomprehensible to him. After nearly 13 years of life, he discovered that the world began to make less sense with every passing year. That wasn't totally accurate, though, because he found some measure of reason and logic in nature, in plants, animals, rivers, and seas. He found it difficult to comprehend the people who lived there. He was aware that he was unique, that he had a different perspective on the world, that he lived his life differently from others, that he was raised differently, and even that he had a demon. Nevertheless, he was still human, so he couldn't understand why he couldn't relate to other people. Was it him? Was there something essential that made it possible for others to relate to him, or was it just that he had changed so much that people stopped seeing him as something human? He simply couldn't think like them, he wasn't even sure how they thought, and he probably would never find out. Instead of trying, he turned inward and tried to reason with them. When he was unable to find any explanation for their behavior, thoughts, or even existence, He left them and sought comfort in things that made sense to him, such as the night sky, the planets and stars moving in their predetermined paths, a river flowing down and eroding stones in its path, or even birds flying through the air. Sadly, his introspection was cut short when he sensed the air shifting, suggesting that someone had just shushed behind him. The man standing behind him was one of the few people he had met who did not totally perplex him, and he was also one of the few who appeared willing to put up with his admittedly cold demeanor. "Hello senpai, a beautiful night, no?" he said to one of the few people he might call a friend, though he was still not sure what the word meant. "Ah, Naruto, so this is where you ran off to. And here I was thinking you had finally found yourself a girlfriend." In addition, he was the most obnoxious person he knew, at least, he was in the top 10. He responded without looking at the man still standing behind him, saying, "Why you persist in concerning yourself in my love life I will never understand. Besides, you are very well aware that I do not have nor have I ever had a girlfriend, and if you're going to go out of your way to annoy me, then you could at least try to be a little more creative." Ma. What can I say? You ran off so fast that I didn't have a chance to think up anything better. Besides, even if it is a little overused, you can never go wrong with a classic. Besides, I'm pretty sure I've been telling you to call me Kakashi for longer than I've been teasing you about you lack of arm candy. Kakashi responded by sitting next to his younger companion. Naruto was only able to shake his head in frustration. "Perhaps, but I'm sure that you didn't come here to nag at me about my lack of arm candy, so to speak. You wound me. Can't I just drop by to visit my ever so cute little friend?" He laughed. All Naruto could do was stare at him. He rubbed the back of his head while laughing. Right, he said. "Well, the Hokage did mention something about wanting to see you tomorrow or something. I wasn't really listening. You see, I had just gotten to the art where Muroko had confessed he undying love for Shinji and was about to remove. He was unable to finish the work because of an inappropriate giggle." Naruto's only option was to roll his eyes at his companion. Even though he might have been one of the village's strongest residents, he was still a pervert. He got up, walked to the far end of the building, and hurried to his apartment for a well-earned nap after saying, "You know, one of these days someone's going to use that book against you somehow, and then we'll see who gets the last laugh." Kakashi sat silently on the roof of ANBU headquarters, gazing back at the location where his younger friend vanished, and he sighed slowly. Since being assigned to assist in training the younger man along with several other ANBU, he had known him for nearly 9 years. During that time, he felt he had gotten to know him fairly well, and he doubted that anyone truly understood what he was thinking. And he was able to say for the first time in his life that he had found someone more dysfunctional than himself. Yes, he did a good job of hiding it, as did Naruto, with his icy professional demeanor and his small perverted book and the time he spent gazing at the memorial stone. He was aware that, if he was being completely honest with himself, he had more mental health issues than most shinobi who survive long enough to make ANBU do, but the boy he had grown to consider a friend outperformed him and probably everyone else. The fact that he had not yet broken was evidence of his strength of will, but Kakashi knew that it would happen eventually because no one could live that kind of life. Although it may sound harsh and heartless, Kakashi sincerely hoped that he would not be in the area when it occurred because he knew that it would be extremely messy and that there was very little chance that anything nearby would survive long enough to notice the tale. When the boy became confused by the behavior of those around him, he did what he could, trying to help him understand emotions like love and empathy and hoping and praying that one day he would finally understand what it meant to be human. Although he may not have had much hope for that ever happening, it was the least he could do because, after all, ANBU looked out for each other. If they didn't, they would all end up alone and even more insane than they already were. His annoyance was barely disguised as he asked, "What?" As though talking about the weather, Sarutobi stated, "I thought I was rather clear, but if you want the condensed version, then I'm ordering you to become a Jounin Sensei." "But why? I mean, I was never even a genin myself. I don't even know the first thing about it. Besides, it would be a waste of resources. If I was teaching them, I would be unable to perform my regular duties. What if something came up that need my attention?" The truth was that he just didn't want to be forced to be around people his own age. He already had enough trouble understanding the other ANBU members, and now he was going to be around people his own age. The idea was enough to make him shudder. "Oh, it won't be that hard. Teach them some of the basics, do a few D-rank missions, it's simple. And as for wasting resources, don't worry, we got along fine before you and I'm sure that we'll survive without you for a while." Besides, if something were to come up that needed your personal touch, I'm sure I could find a substitute replacement to teach in your stead while you were away. As for why, well, I'm an old man and as such I've earned the right to make life difficult for young people such as yourself. Now if there's nothing more, gave the young man next to him on the other side of his desk nothing more to say. He stopped to look through a pile of folders on his desk before hurling one at him, saying, "You're to report to the academy at noon today to pick up your team." He turned back to his paperwork after saying, "You'll find everything you need to know about them in there." Dismissed. For a moment, he just stood there in shock, trying to think of a way to avoid doing this. Regretfully, the Hokage had been quite strict about this mission and was aware that his word was law. As a result, he was now forced to train a number of bats, regardless of their age. He gave a sharp salute and hurried out of the office, saying, "Hi Hokage. Sama." Sarutobi laughed a little when he was certain the boy was gone. Even though it wasn't flawless, it was the best idea he could think of. The boy would hopefully come out of his shell when he interacted with people his own age, or at the very least, the genin would irritate him so much that he couldn't just internalize it. However, there was a chance that many genin would die, but that was a risk he was willing to take. He needed to find someone to replace him because he had been Hokage for far too long, and Naruto was at the top of his list. He had all the power he required. All he needed to do now was grow up and become a human being, and he would be ready to succeed him in a few years. He chuckled a little at the idea of Naruto buried beneath a mountain of paperwork, so he returned his focus to his own. He gave it his most intense death glare in the hopes that it would catch fire just once. When there were no flames, he sighed and started reading about a merchant's complaint about another merchant. Sakura was understandably anxious on the day of the team assignments. Today's announcement would be the focal point of her life for the next few years. Regardless of who she was paired with, she would surely make friends. You couldn't spend that much time with someone and not at least become casual friends. In addition, this was her only chance to get close to Sasuke, who has always been a recluse. She nearly let out a fangirl squeal at the mere prospect of playing on the same team as him. He had a gloomy, brooding vibe, and she knew that all he needed was for her to enter and fix him. He would be so appreciative that he would be forced to reciprocate her feelings, and then she actually did squeal this time. The rest of the class simply turned to look at their pink-haired classmates, who were clearly insane. Anyway, as I was saying, Team 1 will be. The majority of the students simply ignored Iruka's voice, only paying attention when their names were called. The dark-haired boy seated a few seats to her right looked hopeful as Sakura's head shot up and she crossed her fingers. Team 7 will be Sakura Haruno, she said. Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura exclaimed with ear-splitting delight before turning to face her eternal rival in everything Sasuke. They immediately began one of their frequent arguments, which as usual turned into juvenile epithets. Iruka said, trying to draw everyone's focus back to himself because he still needed to announce several teams. Unfortunately, his own attempt to step in had gone entirely unnoticed because Sakura and Ino were so engrossed in their argument. Thank the kami for his devil head jutsu. Shut the hell up. We exclaim. He was a little taken aback when he revealed the team sensei. Now as I was saying, Team 7 will be Sakura Haruno, Sasuke Uchiha, and Kiba Inuzuka. Your Jounin Sensei will be Naruto Uzumaki. He helped create the genin teams and choose which sensei should be on which team as their academy teacher. Hakate Kakashi was supposed to be leading Team 7 when he last checked. The Hokage's signature appeared on the list, so he assumed it was a last-minute decision, even though it was all more than a little suspicious. He only needed a few more minutes to complete the list. He had barely finished when all of the students rushed out the door, almost tripping him in the process. Okay, you're dismissed for lunch. Just remember your Jounin senseis will be arriving after lunch, so be sure to be back before the bell rings. He had time to reflect on this new development with Team 7 sensei now that he had nearly an hour before his students returned. Granted, he hadn't even considered the host of the Nine Tails in years. After all, he had virtually vanished following the Hokage's announcement regarding him. In all honesty, this situation was becoming increasingly strange now that he had time to consider it. The boy should only be roughly the same age as the other students in the recently graduated class, unless he was misinformed. He must have been a member of the Ninja Corps as a result. to be regarded as strong enough to be a Jounin Sensei for years. But that in itself unnerved him. In addition, he was the Kyuubi's container, and Iruka began to wonder how stable someone like that could be. Regretfully, he was unable to do so and, like everyone else, had to obey the Hokage's commands. Lunch had flown by, and before long, everyone was back in their former classroom for the final time. Though in some instances this was more one-sided than others, the majority were chatting enthusiastically with their new teammates. Sakura, seated to the left of her crush, asked, "Now that we're on the same team and everything, do you want to go out and get something to eat or something?" He responded with a hint of annoyance in his voice. No, after all, there was a limit to how many times one could say no before it got boring. His tirade was cut short by a punch to the back of his head. "What the hell are you, gay? You got a smoking hottie hanging of your arm and you say no, what the hell is wrong with you? If it was me," he went on. The pink-haired girl on his right screamed, "Shut the hell up, Baka. Don't talk to Sasuke-kun like that again or I'll give you a beating you won't soon forget." Sasuke sat there in silence throughout the entire scene, hoping the sensei would arrive and rescue him from his team's insanity. The team senseis began showing up shortly after lunch bell rang, usually just to pick up their team and head off to a remote area of the village. At last, Team 7 was the only remaining team. Being the last team to be picked up irritated Kiba and Sakura, who were more than happy to express their frustration. Even Sasuke, who was a little more composed, wasn't happy about being the last team to be selected. All three genin, however, strained to make a good first impression on their new teacher when they heard footsteps approaching the room. All three were stunned into a stunned silence by what came through the door. His bangers were styled so that they framed his face on both sides, and his long silver hair reached his lower back. He had 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek. Although he still had some baby fat, his face was smooth and sharp overall. The most striking feature, though, was his nearly glowing blue eyes. Not because they appeared to glow, but rather because they were slitted like a cat. As far as they could tell, he was dressed only in a pair of black shinobi pants, and his feet were covered by knee-high black leather boots with silver buckles. In lieu of a shirt, he wore a long black leather coat with silver palindromes on his shoulders and 2 leather belts crossed in an X across his chest. The biggest sword they had ever seen, which was nearly twice as tall as the man wielding it and likely 7 feet long, was in his left hand. However, the requirement that their sensei be no older than they were kept them all firmly in place. There was no sense in it. The majority of the other senseis they had seen were at least in their late 20s. There was no way the boy in front of them could be older than 13. It wasn't a question. Team 7, I presume. He went on without waiting for them to show that they had heard him. Without further ado, he turned around and left the room without another look at his team, his long coat flaring out behind him. "Meet me up on the roof in 5. Their new sensei had just left, and the 3 new genin just stared at the door. "Ah, you guys just saw what I just saw, right? He seemed our age to you as well, right?" I asked Kiba, and he was really perplexed. Sakura could only nod her head. Sasuke, on the other hand, was attempting to calm himself because he saw someone his own age who was already so much older than him. He couldn't help but start comparing the silver-haired boy to his brother, and even though he was certain that Itachi would win a fight between the two because Itachi was still Uchiha and only another Uchiha could kill Uchiha. Nevertheless, his new sensei had to have been strong enough to have become a Jounin, and he was ready to do what he had to learn from him, even if it meant temporarily swallowing his pride. "Come on. He only gave us 5 minutes to get to the roof, and I for one would rather not be late." He then got up and left the room, his 2 teammates following him. XXXXX He was leaning against the railing when he first heard his new students come up the stairs. To be honest, he wasn't very impressed with them, but it was still too early to judge them and he was probably just venting his frustration at having to do this to them. He waited for them to arrive, shaking his head to get his mind straight. First was the young Uchiha. He may not have read all the way through his file, but it was hardly necessary to understand the boy. Unfortunately, he had never had the pleasure of serving with Itachi, but he had met the prodigal Uchiha on numerous occasions when he had been younger. He had even served as a sparring partner on a few occasions. Truthfully, even now he still held some respect for the older boy. That's not to say he would not kill him if their paths ever crossed. He was still a missing nin, and no matter how much he may have respected him, that would not stop him from doing his duty. But back to the boy standing in front of him, it was easy to guess that the boy was walking down the path of the Avenger, so to speak. He already knew the boy was going to be a problem, not only in the fact that his attitude was less than exemplary and he was most likely even less stable than himself, but simply because revenge was another one of those emotions that he still had trouble understanding. Kakashi had said it was one of those things that he couldn't really explain, but something that one had to experience firsthand. The only thing he could think of doing to help the problem was to do the same thing he suspected the Hokage of doing to him. He would force the boy to interact with his peers and hope that he would connect to them on some level. His only female student came next. He had not yet gotten very far in her record, but he could already tell that the majority of her knowledge was academic rather than practical, which was not necessarily a bad thing, but he could tell just by looking at her that, even for a Kanonichi, she was pitifully weak in both her physical and chakra reserves. He had planned to start by taking the girl's physical training very seriously, and then he might suggest that she receive specialized training in either medical jutsu or genjutsu. The last one was Kiba Inuzuka, who was the team's tracker and, regrettably, had the attitude of a front-line fighter. He was extremely self-assured and had witnessed more ninjas die from their own conceit than from enemy fire, and he was probably heavily reliant on his clan's jutsu, like the majority of ninja from prestigious clans, something he hoped to break from. Nevertheless, he would probably be the simplest fix of all his new genin. Alright, let's introduce ourselves now that we're all present. You will refer to me as Naruto Sensei or simply Sensei, even though my name is Naruto Uzumaki. I don't really have any hobbies, but I suppose you could count stargazing if you wanted to. You don't need to know what I like or don't. Regarding aspirations for the future, I don't think I need one, and I don't really have one. You now, he said, gesturing to Sasuke. My name is Sasuke Uchiha, and I detest a lot of things and don't really like anything. Regarding interests, training is the only thing that comes to mind that fits that description. Regarding his future aspirations, he concluded with a frown as his mind shifted to that man. I'm going to kill a certain man and bring my clan back to its former glory, he said. He turned to his pink-haired pupil without even looking at him again, and said in a slack drawl, "You next." Oh, I see. My name is Sakura Haruno. I enjoy reading and Sasuke-kun. She glared at her K9. Like teammate, saying, I hate loud idiot bakas. As for hobbies, she said, glancing at Sasuke before letting out a little squeal. And a dream for the future, she said, turning back to her brooding teammate and squealing even louder. Naruto was unsure of what to do at this point because he had never been around girls his own age and wasn't sure if this was typical behavior. His sensitive ears couldn't handle it, so he moved on to his last student, hoping it wasn't. It's my turn now. This is my friend Akamaru, and my name is Kiba Inuzuka. I enjoy meat, dogs, and attractive women. I don't like vegetables, ugly girls, or cats. Regarding interests, we are training with Akamaru here to be the best. His final statement was to stand up and give the rest of his team the thumbs up. As for my dream for the future, I want to become clan head and make my clan even stronger than it already is. He went as far as saying, right, well now that we know each other I can tell you about the next part of your genin test. Before the three genin sitting in front of him interrupted him with cries of indignation. Deciding he was not in the mood to listen to their complaints, he let loose a little bit of killing intent to silence them. I guess the next section is a survival test. He then shushed off, leaving a bewildered group of genin still standing on the academy's roof. In any case, meet me at Training Ground 7 at 6 tomorrow morning and bring all your ninja equipment. It was early the next morning when Naruto walked into the clearing that made up Training Ground 7. Looking around he noticed Sasuke leaning against a tree with Sakura not far away sending said dark-haired boy love long looks. However, it wasn't until he noticed the snoring did he spot Kiba. There at the foot of one of the trees fast asleep was the dog-like boy and his small dog sleeping soundly. Shaking his head and with a small smile on his face he slowly walked over to the sleeping boy, bent down and covered the boy's nose and mouth so he was no longer able to breathe. It did not take long for his eyes to snap open and dart around wildly looking for the reason he was no longer able to breathe. Let this be a lesson: if you're going to sleep during practice, you had better be able to detect a threat in your sleep, or next time you just might not wake up. He drawled with no real emotion in his voice. He then walked away from the still prone boy until he was able to see all three genin without having to move his eye. Now normally I would test you on your teamwork with some kind of overcomplicated test of some sort. But luckily for you, the Hokage has all but forbidden me from failing you, and in so doing freeing me from the hell that I'm sure being your sensei is going to be. Since you've essentially already assured me that you'll become genin, we're just going to have a spare so I can assess your strengths and shortcomings. Since this is essentially a team exercise, feel free to collaborate with one another. If you intend to hit me even once, you should do it with the intention of killing me. Now. He looked around the clearing, identifying each of the three genin, and said, "Well, at least you all know how to hide properly." As he finished, all three genin vanished into the woods. "Well, it seems I need to motivate you all to come out of hiding. How about we all do double training for the next week if we can't get a clean blow on me? It seems reasonable, doesn't it?" He asked no one in particular, and almost immediately after finishing, both Kiba and Akamaru came running out of the bushes in a dead charge. He didn't even change his stance, he just stood there waiting for the two missiles, which were Akamaru and Kiba, to approach him. Just before they did, Naruto simply jumped over them, landing softly behind them both, then spun on his right leg and kicked Kiba hard in the side, sending him flying into Akamaru, who then crashed into one of the many trees that surrounded the clearing. Rule number 1. Make sure you have a plan before you engage the enemy. He said over Kiba's unconscious body, but his respite was brief, as a flurry of shurikens slammed into him, only to reveal that all they had hit was a large log. "Sasuke, that was far superior. But it was a bit too straightforward. You should have tried to get me to move into a better position for either another trap or an ambush," said the silver-haired man behind Sasuke, who had believed he had hidden himself in the tree to the point where their sensei could not have hit him. "But if I had been a little slower, you just might have hit me. But for a new genin it was probably okay," he said as Sasuke registered that his position had been made and jumped down into the clearing. Naruto followed him, and now both were just standing in the clearing staring each other down. While Sasuke was staring at Naruto, Naruto just had a bored expression on his face. "Well, now what? Since you have my full attention, why don't you demonstrate Uchiha's strength and power?" After reading through all of their files last night, he learned that Uchiha, the favorite of all, apparently had a very short fuse. With that firmly in place, he ran through a series of hand seals ending on Tora and yelled our grand fireball technique. Sasuke became enraged, realizing that the man was clearly mocking his family. Well, he'll teach him not to underestimate Uchiha again. Sasuke was more than a little taken aback when he saw that his sensei had made no move to avoid being hit by his fireball, but when the smoke cleared and he saw that there was no charred corpse, he went back into a defensive stance and started to look around the clearing for his opponent. Unfortunately, it was too late, and by the time his sensei had fully emerged from the ground, he was buried up to his neck in the ground. "Well, that was rather impressive for a genin, but it's far too easy to anger you. I would suggest you work on that, or it may just get you killed one of these days." He then walked away from the now enraged head of the last Uchiha. Where did Pinky end up now? He asked himself as he surveyed the forest before making his way farther into it. Pinky whispered to herself, that was close. She had witnessed how he had taken care of both Kiba and Sasuke, and she knew that she had no chance against him and that her best chance of escaping this clearing relatively unscathed would be to hide until the allotted time was up. Then she heard a noise come from beneath her, and when she looked down, her heart stopped. There was Sasuke, her Sasuke, but he didn't look like his normal cool self. He was covered in cuts, and several kunai protruded from his back. She yelled in shock as she jumped down from her tree to tend to her Sasuke. However, just as she reached him, he fell to one knee, coughed a large amount of blood, and then fell flat on his face. Sasuke-kun. Oh Sasuke-kun, please be okay, please be okay. She kept repeating this over and over until she reached his now prone body. However, when she reached him and turned him over, all she could see was a large number of deep cuts in this torso, all bleeding copious amounts of blood. It was then that he cracked one of his eyes open and feebly lifted his head so his mouth was very close to her ear. Why, Sakura? Why did you not assist us? You were where? As he finished, his head went limp and his breathing stopped. and for a moment the world was silent. Then, a single, agonized scream scattered the birds in the trees, and Sakura knew nothing more. The accusation in his voice was like a knife to her heart. Well, perhaps I went too far. Up in a tree, looking down on the pink-haired girl on the forest floor, the silver-haired man thought to himself, oh well, there's nothing I can do about it now anyhow. Besides, it's her own damn problem if she can't pull off a basic D-class genjutsu. With that, he leapt from the tree, grabbed his pink-haired subordinate, and started to move toward the other members of the team. Kiba was surprised to discover that he, Sasuke, and Sakura were all tied to a post when he woke up. He then saw his silver-haired sensei standing in front of them, his monstrous sword leaning against his left shoulder. Well, I must say that was pathetic, Kiba said. Not only did none of you even have a chance to hit me, but you all continue to go off and do your own thing even after I specifically tell you to cooperate. To be honest, was my age the reason? Did you assume that since we are the same age, our power levels must be nearly equal? Is that it? Or did you simply believe that you were strong enough to defeat a Jounin-level ninja by yourself? Because you're going to have a rude awakening if you believe either of those things. Now, normally I would give you a failing grade right away and send you back to the academy for another year, but I'm afraid I can't. Therefore, for the upcoming week, we will double your workout regimen. That implies that you will arrive at 5 o'clock in the morning and stay until 7 o'clock that evening. If I'm feeling giving, I suppose I'll let you go home if you faint. The genin could only sit there and stare at the person they knew would now be permanently ensnared in their nightmares for years to come before he swung his sword and cut all of their bindings at once. Now get out of here, and you better be here on time, and you better be awake. He was lying on his apartment's roof, watching the sun set in the west, when he sensed one of his friends' recognizable chakra signature. Hello, senpai. Have you come to see how I'm doing? He inquired. I suppose I can find time in my busy schedule to check up on you as well, but more like to make sure that everyone on your team is still alive. Having said that, how did it go? And they are all still alive, isn't that right? He sat down next to his friend with silver hair and asked, maintaining a straight face. As he watched the last of the sun's light go out and the first of the stars begin to shine, he said, if it makes you feel any better, they are all still alive and in relatively good health, though I make no promises about their health in the week to follow. I can't say that I'm envious of them, but I did hear about what you have planned for them in the upcoming week. I doubt that a couple of fresh genin will last the entire week. Most ANBU would object to training at your level for a week. Yes, I agree, but it's a good way to show how different we are. Since I don't have age on them, I need them to know that I'm still much stronger than them right now. As more and more stars started to shine in the night sky, he said, mentally naming constellations, they must realize that I am in charge and that it is in their best interest to do as I tell them. Kakashi, who like most shinobi had developed a rather dark sense of humor, laughed at his own joke and said, that's a good plan. Just make sure that you don't accidentally kill one off. I hear there's quite a lot of paperwork involved in accidental genin deaths. Anyway, now that I know you got through the day with what little sanity you already possessed, I was wondering if you wanted to go out with me and the other Jounin Senseis to grab a drink or two. And before you completely reject me, keep in mind that your genin squad is the only company you have to look forward to in the near future. Kakashi shuddered at the idea of spending all of his time with a group of green brats, and he could only imagine what it would be like for his shorter friend. All right, I guess a few drink would not kill me, but I do have a busy morning so I can't stay out all night. After giving it some thought, Naruto realized that, although he was uncomfortable around other ANBU and Jounin, it was nothing compared to trying to be around people his own age. It wouldn't hurt to at least try to be around people who made at least a little sense in comparison to his previous company. If spending a day with a group of brats his own age had opened Kakashi's mind to the idea of at least mixing with some of the other people in the village, even if it was just because he felt more at ease than doing things with the younger crowd, then that was fine with him. Well then let's go, and don't worry too much, it really is going to just be you, me, and maybe 3 or 4 others. Hell, the bar we go to is usually pretty empty in the first place. I don't need your babying. He got up, brushed off his trousers, and leapt off the side of the building. Although I do appreciate your sentiments, I assure you I'll be fine now, let's go. Unlike some people, I could mention I would rather not be late. Despite his insistences that Kakashi did not need to baby him, he was still glad that the bar was almost empty when they arrived. In fact, the only people in the room were 3 people sitting around one of the larger tables in the room. The headbands as well as the extra 2 seats lead him to believe that this was the group of other Jounin Sensei Kakashi was talking about, the bartender and 2 men sitting at the bar. Letting out a small sigh of relief at the small number of people he would have to be around, he let himself be led by Kakashi over to the table and took a seat between him and the only female at the table. Immediately it became painfully obvious that Kakashi had not told the others that he was coming. Not that he could blame him, he had turned him down so many times before that he obviously had felt that today would have been no different. However, it was, and now he had 3 strangers giving him funny looks. Unfortunately, only Kakashi had ever served in Anbu, so he was unfamiliar with the other people at the table. Kakashi decided it would be his responsibility to start the conversation after noticing his friends becoming uncomfortable and not wanting to spoil what was likely to be his first night out in a long time. All right, let me introduce myself. Asuma Sarutobi, the 3rd son, is to Naruto's left, and Kurenai Yuhi is the beautiful woman to your left. Naruto is Maida Guy, but you can just call him Guy. This is Naruto, everyone. We served in Anbu together for a while, and now he's the sensei for Team 7. The silence was almost deafening. He had hoped that the others would try to strike up a conversation, something simple to help the boy come out of his shell, but sadly, his introduction had the opposite effect, and all the others could do was stare at the silver-haired kid. Fortunately, the silence was broken when the bartender arrived to take orders, and to everyone's surprise, Naruto ordered the same sake as Kakashi. He was about to take his first sip, but was stopped by a hand that shot across the table. Oh, woe is me. I cannot stand to witness such an unyouthful act and stand back and do nothing. Someone who is young enough to make Anbu at that age must have really enjoyed their youth, and seeing someone smother that youth with things like alcohol makes me feel less young myself. Blurted out the guy, who was still holding Naruto's arm tightly. Naruto had never heard anyone shouting about youth and the springtime of youth, and all he really wanted was to get away from the blatantly insane man as quickly as possible. He did everything he could to avoid cutting the man's hand off and running screaming out of the room. Let him go, Guy. He's still new to our little group and we don't want to scare him off after the first night. Besides, there's nothing unyouthful about it. After all, Naruto here can't get drunk, isn't that right, Naruto? Fortunately, Kakashi was present to run interception. It was difficult to get the boy to talk, and Kakashi knew he would have to take the lead in the conversation before he even approached her. Before shaking his head and turning to face Asuma and Kurana, Naruto gave the strange man in green spandex one final anxious glance. You were right, Naruto said. Not that it bothered him, it had been there practically since birth, and if it were to be removed now, it would probably feel like he was losing a piece of himself. The Kyuubi filters all impurities in my blood, including alcohol, he observed, noting that everyone around the table winced when he mentioned the name of the beast he had sealed inside of him. It seems that we have found the person whose job it is to ensure that we all return home safely at the end of the night. Kakashi joked before tossing back a saucer of sake. Now he remembered why Naruto never came drinking with him. It wasn't just that he was uncomfortable around people, it was that people felt the same way about him. The night proceeded as follows. Naruto would usually keep to himself and drink his sake, but sometimes Kakashi would shift the topic to him. He would respond with a few questions and then gradually move away from the main topic of discussion until he could safely resume drinking his sake. Well, that wasn't a complete bust, but it could have gone better. By the way, I'm sorry for not warning you about Guy earlier. He takes a bit of getting used to. Kakashi apologized. As he walked alongside his much taller friend, the silver-haired child said, That's all right. Although I wouldn't say I enjoyed myself, it really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I guess that over time some of the uneasiness I felt around them would dissipate, and hopefully vice versa. Unable to conceal the hope in his voice, Kakashi asked, Am I to take it that you'll be joining me the next time we get together for drinks? I can't make any promises, but I can see the benefit of associating with my fellow senseis. If that means accompanying you for drinks, then so be it, replied he. In fact, it was pretty amazing. Even after a week of training at this level, they all still passed out before the end of the day, but it was a significant improvement that they could now last nearly 3/4 of the day before passing out, whereas when they had first started, they had only managed to make it to lunch. Now, even Sakura could keep up with her 2 teammates more easily. Naturally, the goal of the entire exercise program was to improve their physical conditioning, but it was a good beginning, and once their endurance improved, he would be able to teach them proper taijutsu rather than the pitiful justification of a fighting style that they learned in the academy. That was neither here nor there, though, and he had to ensure that his students returned home safely at the moment. Since none of them were even awake, it appeared that he was responsible for getting them there. In order to get his students home, he made 3 shadow clones using a single-hand seal. He walked back into the training area up to the 3 posts that were firmly planted in the ground, where he had also planted his sword at the start of the day, after the 3 copies of himself had disappeared. His long silver hair was blowing in the afternoon breeze. He quickly drew it out and assumed a one-handed fighting stance after grabbing the foot-long handle in one hand. He jumped up and made a wide, sweeping slash in midair before returning to his starting stance and landing gracefully on one of the stumps. He leaps into the air once more and performs several stabbing motions before landing on the far left stump. Before closing his eyes and raising his sword to a two-handed stance with the blade parallel to his eye, he turns to his right and surveys the training grounds. He inhaled deeply and stood for nearly a minute, taking in his surroundings. In less than a second, his eyes snapped open, and he ran along the stumps while maintaining eye contact with his sword. He jumped off the last one, performed a flip, and brought his sword down in a two-handed over-head slash that, had Naruto not had such control over his blade, would have cut Kakashi in half. Kakashi deadpanned, unfazed by the fact that he had been almost sliced in two. You know, most people just say hi when greeting someone. Naruto smiled slightly and asked, and when have I ever been most people? Touché, said Kakashi, grinning his trademark eyes. As he put his sword away on a seal on his forearm, Naruto questioned, So, what? Countered Kakashi. Naruto merely moaned. I know you've been watching our little training sessions. I assumed you have some comment to make about it, or else you would have waited till I was relaxing to bother me, like usual. His eyes never left a smile as he said, yes, I am getting rather predictable in my old age, aren't I? But seeing as how you've figured out my dastardly plan, I suppose that I might as well. Well then? Was I being too hard on them? I'll admit I'm not entirely sure how to teach, let alone teach genin. But they're not dead, so no harm no foul. Besides, I have a relatively good idea of where their limits are now, so I can tone it down a bit now. Explained the Jounin with silver hair. He waved his hand dismissively next to his face and said, Ma, you did fine. Besides, most Jounin Sensei usually take it too easy on their pupils, in my opinion anyway. But actually I just came by to invite you out again, same place as last time, same people too. And you know, if you really want to get some advice about teaching, they would be the people to ask. He just sighed. He knew that agreeing to go out more was a bad idea, but he did think that Kakashi made a valid point, and he truly wanted to get some advice about reaching from those who had some experience. Fine, but I'm not going for the company, this is merely an educational experience for me. Kakashi merely gave a small laugh. Sure, whatever you say. I'll drop by ladder to pick you up. If you're going to be late, then I'll just leave without you, replied Naruto. Right, I'll make it a point to be on time then. Naruto turned around, took a few steps back into the training grounds, and returned to his starting stance. Okay, I'll see you then. Now, if you'll excuse me, I still have my own training to do. Kakashi shushined off after saying, Right, I'll see you later. He had witnessed the boy train and had no desire to join the terrain in being sliced into tiny pieces. Fortunately, Kakashi kept his promise and arrived at his meeting with his fellow silver-headed shinobi just 5 minutes late. After exchanging greetings, they headed to the neighborhood ninja bar. Similar to the previous time, 2 seats were vacant and 3 additional people were already seated around one of the room's larger tables. One next to the sole kanonichi, and the other next to the man in green. Naruto was sitting next to the red-eyed woman before Kakashi could blink, so he had to sit next to a guy, oh joy. The conversation quickly took on the same structure as the previous one, with Naruto sitting quietly and sipping his sake. Kakashi trying to get him to join in, and the others alternating between trying to include their younger peer and feeling uneasy about some of his remarks. After concluding that this brief cycle had continued for too long, Kakashi thought it was time to bring up a subject that would at least elicit a few sentences from his younger friend. Let's see him leave this with just a sentence or two. Anyway, As amusing as it is to talk about the springtime of youth guy, I'm actually more interested in hearing about your genin teams. I was just talking with Naruto here about it earlier, isn't that right, Naruto? Kakashi smiled under his mask. With a sigh, Naruto turned back to face the other Jounin Sensei, of which Kakashi was the only one not in attendance. Yes, Kakashi. Senpai here had been watching my team's latest training regime. Unfortunately, I don't know much about being a genin, so I'm not entirely sure how hard I should be pushing them. When I asked Senpai here if he thought if I was pushing them too hard, he told me no, but I would much prefer the opinions of people who have experience in this field, as I know Senpai has never trained a genin team. The majority of the people at the table simply stared at him blankly. That had undoubtedly been the most that any of the three other Jounin Sensei had ever heard from the young boy with the silver hair. Kakashi was taken aback, since he was positive that was the most Naruto had ever said to a group of people who were basically strangers. The first to get better was Guy. Such important this as fanning the flames of youth in our students, truly is a topic worthy of discussion. As for your question of being too hard on your genin, I'll tell you that is impossible. How are we to know where our limits are if we're not pushed hard enough to find them, and it only through sweat, tears and blood that we can improve ourselves, and it's our jobs to show our youthful genin how to fan their own flames so that they may enjoy their springtime of youth. Gut concluded with his pose of good guy that nearly paralyzed Naruto. Naruto simply nodded his head once he had recovered from the shock of the guy's blinding teeth. Although I'm not sure what you said exactly, I did catch the bit about pushing them to their limits, and I'm slightly relieved that at least one person is pushing their students hard as well, said Naruto with a nod of the head. Well, pushing your students is all well and good. You don't want to push them too hard, they're still young, there's no reason to push them to grow up too fast. Besides, it takes time to find where each of your students' skills lay, and even longer for them to decide where they want to specialize. Until they know what they want to study, there's only so much you can do for them. Kurana replied with a slight scowl on her face. That left Naruto unsure of how to react. He was aware of his typical response, which would have been that a childhood was superfluous and that he had managed to get along just fine without one. However, he was aware that this was one of the things that would make the other people uncomfortable around him, which would put an end to the conversation and prevent him from learning more about something about which he was dreadfully ignorant. Fortunately, Kakashi seemed to share his views and was able to voice them much more tactfully than he did. You're just being naive, Kurana. Having a childhood is all well and good, but we're teaching them how to be soldiers and there's no room for kid on the battlefield. I'm going to have to agree with the others on this. Although I do think that they should be eased into this kind of a lifestyle, this really is the time that they should start growing up, especially if they plan on going on anything higher than a D-rank mission, adds Asuma. Before settling into her chair and glaring at the big, hairy ape next to her, Kurana simply huffed and took a long sip of her drink. Fortunately, the remainder of the night passed without incident, and before long, Naruto was assisting his drunk friend back to his apartment while silently scolding the Kyuubi for making him immune to alcohol and forcing him to assist everyone in getting home. Three very sore genin stumbled into what they had come to refer to as the private corner of hell at 6 in the morning. Their senses were already there, waiting for them, just as before. Well, congratulations, you made it through a week of training that would have given most Jounin a tough time, and although you never finished a full day's workout, you did make noticeable progress. Today we'll start taking missions, but first a light warm-up of 10 laps around the clearing, followed by 50 push-ups and sit-ups. The expressions on the faces of all three genin were soft. Like they were getting off light after a week of training from hell. From his position in the middle of the training grounds, the silver-haired boy said, "Well, get to it, unless you want to go back to our previous schedule." They started moving as a result, and the three genin were on their laps before he could blink. Even Sakura, the team's weakest member, completed the training without any issues, making it nearly too simple in comparison to their previous training. He then began to walk back toward the village center, saying, "Well, now that we have that out of the way, we should get a move on. From what I hear, all the good missions usually get picked up rather quickly." The third Hokage said, Naruto-kun, I was wondering when I was going to see. I assume you're here for a mission then? Naruto replied, "Hi, I think my team is ready to start taking missions now." As he dug through a stack of scrolls, the third said, "Well then, let's just see what we have. Yes, I almost forgot about this one, though I'm not sure, this isn't usually something I would send genin on, especially for their first mission. But then again he has been asking that I send you down to see him, and I imagine you'll be able to keep you Jounin out of trouble. The Hokage almost whispered to himself. Naruto felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Only a select few would ask the Hokage to visit him, and if that was who he believed it to be, this would be a very unpleasant day. Sasuke and Kiba were both thinking about the fact that they were being asked to finish a mission that was impossible for any of the other Jounin teams to accomplish. Possibly even a C rank one. Sakura's was more concerned with determining the specifics of their mission. I would really rather prefer never having to see the waste of genetic material again if it was at all possible, but if you order it I will accept whatever mission you ask, the blonde grumbled. He sat up a little straighter in his chair after saying, I understand, I too find him to be rather disturbing at times. But he has the ear of the council and he's not going anywhere anytime soon. Jounin Naruto Uzumaki, you and your team are to deliver a number of important documents to the Research and Development Laboratories, and specifically to the head of the Science Department Hojo. The Hokage spoke with an authoritative tone. Yes sir. He then seized the scroll containing the files they were supposed to deliver. With his genin not far behind, he turned to his team and said, come on, it's a bit of a walk to the entrance, I'll fill you in on the way. He then left the house, went down the stairs, and emerged through the front door into the morning light. Sensei? Who's this Hojo person? I've never heard of him before. Actually I've never even heard of the Research and Development Department before either. Asked Sakura. Even though they didn't express it, Kiba and Sasuke were both curious about their first mission. Not surprising. Both Hojo and his department are not exactly something one would want to make public knowledge. That being said, I would not recommend repeating what you may hear or see down there to your friends. Well, it's not illegal per se. It's something most people would simply be happier off not knowing about. What do you mean? What's so bad about the place? Asked Kiba. He looked at Kiba as he said, you'll see when we get there. That being said, there are a few ground rules you would be wise to follow. 1. Don't touch anything, and I do mean anything. He turned to face Sakura and said, 2. Don't talk to anyone. Knowing how much Hojo would love being able to work with the Sharingan, he turned to Sasuke and said, lastly, if anyone down there asks you to either sign something or agree to something, run. Other than that, just try to keep your head down and save your questions until later. Now form up, we're there. Sakura noticed they had stopped in front of what looked like an old apartment complex when she looked up. But before she could express her doubts, her sensei opened the door and entered, making the others follow or risk being left behind. As she stepped inside, it appeared just as she had imagined, ancient, dusty, and clearly abandoned. Their sensei, however, ignored this and proceeded to the elevator, pressing the call button. All four of them climbed inside the elevator as soon as it arrived. Naruto pressed several buttons after waiting for the doors to close. Sakura realized by this point that the base was concealed and that this was merely a front to conceal the entrance. For a few minutes, they had been using the elevator, pressing the buttons in the correct order to reach each floor. When they finally arrived at the final floor, the elevator started to descend past the main floor and the basement. It continued to do so for nearly 2 minutes before stopping and the doors opening to a sterile white reception room. Welcome Uzumaki-san. Professor Hojo is expecting you. He's currently in exam room 7. I assume you don't need a guide? Inquired the receptionist. He led his genin through the room's only other door and into a lengthy hallway after saying, no, I'll be fine. He guided them past several offices, some of which were empty and others that weren't, until they arrived at the end of the hallway. He turned to his genin and stopped in front of 2 large swinging doors. With that final caution, he pushed open the doors and guided his group into what looked like an enormous warehouse. Remember, don't touch anything. But Sakura screamed as they went by one of the glass containers. Naturally, this attracted the attention of the 2 boys, who then looked into the glass case and jumped back in fear. Inside was. Despite the fact that it appeared somewhat humanoid, none of the genin were completely certain what it was. The skill was the only one that appeared to be decaying. Its legs appeared to be attached backwards, and an extra arm protruded from its back. Sasuke stammered, "WH. Wah. What the hell is that thing?" That's why rule number 3, in fact, all of the rules I mentioned earlier, was in place. It's also why I mentioned that most people were happier just because they were unaware of this place. Come on, the exam rooms are at the other end of the storehouse, and there are a lot more depraved things in here than that, like the good professor, for instance. The closest thing Kiba could link what he was seeing to was a zoo from hell. There were some things that were obviously human at one point, though he could hardly call them that now. Then there were what appeared to be willed animals mutated in the same way as the humans they had passed, then there were things he couldn't even cartelize. By the time they had exited the main storehouse and entered the hallway that lead to the exam rooms, all three genin had become very quiet and had their eyes planted firmly on the floor. Unfortunately, now that they were making their way past the exam rooms, it was now the sound that assaulted their ears. Sometimes it was just a low moan and the quiet muttering of people coming from one room, other times it was a loud agonizing scream that chilled the blood of the genin. In one of the room, what could only be described as a pitiful crying sound followed by the occasional cries for help coming from what sounded like a woman were heard. When Sakura went to open the door, she found her sensei standing in front of it blocking her path. When I said don't touch anything, I meant don't touch anything. However, sensei, someone could be harmed. At the very least, shouldn't we try to see if we can help? Sakura inquired. I'm sure the person behind that door would greatly value our assistance. He raised one eyebrow to punctuate his statement, saying, but that's not our job, and down here shinobi are not the top of the food chain and the curious ones have a way of disappearing, if you catch my meaning. Now let's go, we're almost there. Come on, let's get this over with. The remainder of the walk was thankfully quiet, and before long they found themselves in front of a big double door that bore the large number 7. He was a rather short man, which was made worse by his slight hunch, with black greasy hair tied back in a ponytail, a long strand hanging down over his face, and a pair of small round glasses over his dark beady eyes. Ah, Uzumaki-san, so wonderful to see you again, the young genin said, as the doors swung open with a single vigorous push. And what is this? Have you brought me a gift? As he glared at the three genin who were now partially concealed behind their sensei, the man, who was clearly insane, said, why isn't it even my birthday? Very difficult. As he held out the scroll containing whatever files Hojo had asked the Hokage for, he said, I was told to deliver these to you. And I can assure you that the only reason I'm here at all is because the third said you've requested my presence. Say what needs to be said and let's not prolong this brief meeting any more than absolutely necessary because I'm not in the mood for your games right now. Yes, indeed. Don't we always get right to the point? Why, I remember you running around trying to attract attention when you were a young boy. You would always insist that they stop treating you like a child once you eventually got their attention. Yes, those were the days when you rarely came here to hear me babble. Where have I put that thing now? Oh, yes, now I remember, he said to himself. I'm actually afraid of my own intelligence sometimes, you know. We don't have all day, so come on, let's see your sword. In a puff of smoke, Naruto held Masamune in all its 7-foot glory, the tip of the blade inches from Hojo's neck, and he cautiously brought his thumb to his mouth, biting down just hard enough to draw some blood and swiping it across a seal on his forearm. Ah, Masamune, this is undoubtedly one of the most amazing swords ever created. It brings me back just to see it again. I still recall the day you first saw it. I remember it because it was the only time I ever saw you wearing a genuine expression of awe. If my memory serves me correctly, you were grumbling about how long it took you to unseal it not too long ago. He turned around and walked to one of the numerous workbenches that were scattered throughout the room. There, he searched until he found what he was looking for and came back with what appeared to be the slandered Anbu katana sheath. Yes, he said. Well, I've had my men down in our seal division working on this for some time now, and if I do say so, they really have outdone themselves this time. I understand your thoughts, but believe me when I say that you should give it a try. Surprisingly, it fit perfectly, despite the fact that the sheath was easily more than 3 feet too short to contain Masamune. Naruto could only raise a thin silver eyebrow in suspicion, but the mad doctor strapped the sheath to his hip and slipped Masamune into it without noticing anything other than thinly veiled excitement. I know, it's amazing, isn't it? Hee. I don't even fully understand how this brand new kind of storage seal works, but it seems to have to do with keeping a pocket dimensions door open all the time. Well, at least this wasn't a complete waste of time, Naruto said, glancing down at his now sheathed sword. He said with barely concealed disdain, now, if there's nothing else we should be going. I'm sure there's some experiment that requires your attention and I would hate to deprive you of your fun. All right, then, you're free to stop by whenever you'd like, but you know how much I like our little Verbal arguments, said Hojo, who was already facing away from the group. Sensei. What the devil were those things down there? You mentioned earlier that we should postpone our questions until later. Who is that guy from Hojo? Furthermore, what on earth was he discussing? As they were in the exact warehouse that concealed the secret facility they had just left, and none too soon in the Jounin's view, Kiba blurted out. Hojo is an expert in genetics, and those were a few of his experiments. It's easy to figure out exactly who he is. The only reason he isn't immediately killed for his actions down there is because, over the years, he has given Konoha several innovations that have given Shinobi an advantage over the compensation. He is a state-sponsored madman. To emphasize his point, he gave his genin a severe glare. But don't be fooled, the man is totally crazy, devoid of even the most fundamental moral sense, and not someone you want to notice you. All right, I understand. Distance is good, Hojo bad. It sounded as though he had known you for a very long time, but what about the topic he was discussing? What's the story, then? With Sasuke and Sakura paying close attention, Kiba asked. The story is very simple. Up until I was 7 I spent most of my time down there. Are you telling me that you were born and raised in that area? He had only been down there for less than an hour, but he was certain that if he never went down there again, it would be too soon. In fact, he was certain that he would be thinking about that place in his nightmares for weeks to come. Asked Kiba in shock. Yes. You could say that, I guess. How about your parents? What kind of people would genuinely allow their son to grow up in such a setting? Sakura said, still in disbelief over what she had heard and seen there, and then she realized what she had said, covering her mouth with her hands and wishing she could take it back. Again a simple answer, both my parents died when I was born, so I can't really say what kind of people they were or if they would have objected to my living arrangements. Sakura felt like a complete jerk now. She hung her head in shame and embarrassment and said, I'm sorry, Sensei, I didn't know. It's okay. In all honesty, I could care less. You mean that the death of your parents doesn't bother you? Kiba, who simply couldn't imagine not caring if any of his family members died, asked in shock. To him, family was the most important thing in the world. As I mentioned, they passed away when I was born, so it's difficult to miss something meaningless that never existed. Come on, you all still have a lot of training left, and we still have a good few hours of sunlight left. An interesting day? Kakashi inquired. Naruto, who may not have displayed it on the outside, always felt uneasy after visiting Hojo in the labs. You could say that, senpai. He replied, keeping his gaze fixed on the starry night sky. Yes, I did hear. You really know how to make your genin happy, I must say. With a chill down his back, he remarked, I also heard you told your cute little genin about some of your past. I still remember my first time down there, still have nightmares about what I saw. It wasn't so much a question as a statement. Nothing much, but they asked, and after what Hojo said down there I doubted that they would have accepted silence as answer. It was just easier to answer their questions than deal with them trying to find answers on their own. As he sat down next to Naruto and looked up at the stars, Kakashi said, well, I have to agree with you there. Especially seeing as how the only place they would find those answers is with Hojo, and I think the less contact they have with that madman the better. In any case, I imagine that after that last mission they might be more appreciative of having to do normal D-rank missions. Perhaps, though I wonder who will be the first to break under the boredom and ask for a higher level mission. My money's on the Inuzuka, he doesn't have the temper to accept pulling weeds as actual ninja work. Maybe, but Sasuke might be in the same boat. It doesn't really matter in the end, though, because they are nearly ready for basic C ranks. They just need a few weeks to hone their skills. Well, you know them best, so if you say so. Besides, I doubt that there's much out there that you wouldn't be able to handle anyway. Laughed Kakashi. True enough, though I would rather not have to worry about having to protect 3 green genin at the same time. Ma, you worry too much. Besides, that's still weeks away. Just make sure to train them up a bit before taking them outside of the village and they'll define. Perhaps. As predicted by Kakashi, Kiba broke down first, but it was clear that Sasuke agreed with him entirely. No, and no once more. I'm not going to go after that damn cat once more. I'm not training 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to pull some old prunes weeds or chase after some dumb cat. When the Hokage offered them the task of pursuing Tora the cat once more, Kiba blurted out, I can speak for the rest of my team when I say we all want a better mission. Oh, is that correct? Well, is it true? Do you all think the same way? The Hokage asked, laughing. The other genin in front of him was asked. The first to agree with his irritable teammate was Sasuke, who said, "Hi Hokage. Sama, although I think the Dobi could have phrased his request more eloquently, I agree we are ready for more difficult missions. See, I informed you that they..." "Hey, what was the call you just gave me?" Kiba, who had just realized he had been insulted, yelled. Before focusing on the team's Kanonichi, the Hokage simply chuckled at their antics. "And you, do you think you're ready for a harder mission?" "Oh, right. I believe. That is, we still have a long way to go, but I believe we're ready." She responded a little apprehensively because she had never before been directly addressed by the Hokage. "Well, it's admirable that you all have such faith in your abilities. What do you think, Naruto? Are they prepared for a C-rank mission?" he asked, turning to face the final team's 7-member. He gave an honest response, saying, "Hi Hokage. Sama, I think they're ready for a low-level C-class mission, if you have one available that is." They were far from flawless, and their teamwork still needed some work, but there was very little chance that they would encounter anything more dangerous than a few inebriated bandits on a low-level C-class mission. "You're in luck, then. I believe you all might be able to handle our straightforward escort mission to the Land of Waves. Would you send the client in, Iruka?" the Cage inquired. "Yes sir, right away." He got up from his chair and rushed out the door, but sadly, it was not the amiable Chunin who had entered. "What does this signify? I pay a lot of money for protection here, and all I get are a bunch of snotty brats. How are they supposed to protect me when they aren't even old enough to drink?" Indignantly, the visibly inebriated man yelled out. The drunk only managed to get away with saying those things unharmed because Naruto had a firm hand on each of his male students' shoulders. "I promise you that my 3 students will be more than enough protection against any bandits we may encounter on our way to Wave," Naruto said. "And even though I'm getting older, I can guarantee you that I'm one of the village's best Jounin, and I'll be more than capable of handling any unforeseen situation," Naruto reassured him. "Are you a member of the elite?" He interrupted himself when he saw the tip of his 7-foot sword leveled at his eye, saying, Never mind. Come on kid, who do you think you're kidding here? You can't be older than 13, so stop pretending to be." "That's what I thought. Now we'll meet you at the West Gate tomorrow at 0700. He then glanced at his female companion. "Remember to pack for at least 3 weeks, dismissed." They all hurried off to pack for their first actual ninja mission after saying, "Hi Sensei." The group of 5 left for the Land of Waves early the following morning. "You take point, Kiba." As the village walls vanished into the distance, Naruto called out, "Sasuke and Sakura take flanking positions, and I'll guard the rear." Though he could hear some resentment in Sasuke's voice, the only response was, "Hi Sensei." Probably about being passed over for taking point, he thought to himself, but soon after, thoughts of his students' attitude issues vanished into the background, and he returned his attention to the mission. Regretfully, his thoughts were soon interrupted. "Do they also have ninja in Wave, Tazuna-san?" Sakura inquired. Naturally, Naruto already knew the answer to this question, but the expression that briefly crossed the old bridge builder's face caused him to wonder. Since there was no concrete evidence, he chose to ignore his suspicions until he could learn more about the situation in Wave. "Oh, no, he gave the oversimplified response, "There aren't any ninja in Wave. Wave is a small nation that is encircled by the ocean." With a suspicious glance at the bridge builder, Naruto clarified, "No one thought to build a hidden village because of their natural defenses." "Well, but what about other nations? Were there no nearby villages to visit?" Leave the truth, seeking to Sakura. Well it's just I heard how super awesome Leaf Ninja were, so I decided to go to you guys instead." Naruto observed that their client was getting off to a rather sweet start, and he had already concluded that their client had misled them about the nature of this mission, but he was compelled to proceed without any concrete evidence. When he first noticed it, they had been walking for almost 4 hours. In the middle of the road was a badly made genjutsu. Since it hadn't rained in weeks, they assumed that this would fool any skilled ninja. However, when he looked at his genin, they appeared to have missed it, so he slowed his pace so that when he paced the puddle, his team was already a few feet ahead of him. Well, Senpai always said that life is the best teacher of them all, and they should start getting some experience now rather than when I'm not there to bail them out. With that thought, he allowed himself to be caught in the demon brothers' chains and torn to bits. Sensei! The three genin all screamed simultaneously. Of the two brothers, the taller one said, "Hee, one down." From behind Kiba, the shorter one whispered, "4 more to go." Kiba then raised his clawed hand to try to entangle him in the lethal chain that had just ended their odd, but just as he was ready to do so, the large kennel in the sky Sasuke's shuriken caught the chain and pinned it to one of the numerous trees surrounding the road. Even though they were shocked that a Gaki managed to pin them to a tree without their knowledge, the Gaki landed on their extended arms between them and gave them two the head mule kicks. The chain that bound the two to the tree broke as they ran around Sasuke, one going toward Sakura, who had positioned herself defensively in front of Tazuna, and the other ignoring Sasuke and going directly toward Kiba. "Enough playing around, brother, you get the old man. I'll deal with this little annoyance." But a powerful wind blew up before either of them could get within a foot of their targets, and in less than a second, both demon brothers were on the ground with their heads a few feet away from their bodies. "Are you still alive, Sensei?" Sakura shouted out. "To kill me, more than a few Chunin would be required. That being said, you did a good job protecting the client Sakura, and I can already tell that you are getting better at your aim." Sakura was thrilled to receive praise from her normally silent sensei, and Sasuke even showed that he was proud to have received it from someone he had previously envied because of the man's strength. However, the third genin on Team 7 was still staring down at the ground, lost in thought. When he looked down, he saw that Akamaru had firmly sunk his teeth into his owner's hand. "Ow, damn it Akamaru, what the hell, I froze. After all my talk and all the training sensei has given me and I still froze." A sharp pain in his hand snapped him out of his reverie. "Damn it, you're right, next time I'll show them just what we can do, buddy. I promise we're never going to run from a fight like that again." With a sudden outburst, the small dog let go of Kiba's hand before dropping back to the ground and then began barking and yipping at him. Akamaru simply yipped in agreement before leaping up and assuming his customary position on Kiba's head. He swiftly turned his head and gave Tazuna a chilly glare, saying, "Well, we're all happy that you got your confidence back, Kiba, but there are more important things to take care of. Would you be so kind as to tell me why you felt it necessary to lie to us, Tazuna-san?" He started to say, I don't know what you're. But before he could finish, he noticed that a very long sword's point was hanging dangerously near his mouth. "Well, what I meant to say was, that, well, okay, I know you caught me, but I can really explain. As you can see, Wave is currently extremely impoverished. Our Dimia is completely broke, and the bridge I'm building is our village's only hope. Regretfully, the man in charge of Wave's current situation doesn't want me to finish because he owns all the shipping lanes and will lose his monopoly if I complete my bridge. If I may ask, just who has placed a price on your head?" Naruto simply nodded his head at the conclusion. With a low voice, he said, "You've probably heard of him, Gato of Gato Shipping." Gato, as in the Gato, one of the continent's richest men? Well, that definitely changed things, he thought to himself. Although he wasn't very good at politics or economics, he had heard of Gato. The shipping tycoon was one of the richest men in the world, and that was the main issue. He would have no trouble hiring a Jounin-level nin with that kind of money. "Yes, Gato." With his head hung low, he remarked, "He came to our small country about a year ago and began to take over. We are now extremely poor and it was all we could do to save up for a C-rank mission. But whatever the case, this mission has gone beyond our agreed upon contract," Naruto said, giving him one of his icy looks. "I have every right to terminate this mission at this time and let you face your destiny." If it was possible, Tazuna's face went even paler before he abruptly composed himself and said, "It's okay, I get it. But don't worry about me, it's my poor daughter that I'm worried about. Her poor heart can only take so much pain and I hope that my death won't push her over the edge of despair and cause her to take her own life." The three genin were now giving Tazuna a strange look, and my poor grandson having to go through life without a mother or any other family will definitely fall into a life of crime, probably ending with him dying covered in his own blood, face down in a ditch somewhere. With a dramatic sigh, he concluded, "But you're right, it's not your problem. I'll understand if you leave me here to my fate. However, I'll leave the decision up to the rest of my team," Naruto said, glancing at the elderly man and realizing that even he had to concede that it was by far the best attempt to win sympathy he had ever witnessed. All three genin were now looking extremely uncomfortable, unsure whether to feel sorry for him or to congratulate him on one of the best acting performances they had ever seen. Hell, you were going to continue. Even though I froze the first time, I'm not going to give it up now that I have another chance. Kiba shouted out, followed by Akamaru's loud bark. Ignoring Kiba's shady glance, Sasuke said, "As much as it pains me to agree with the Dobi, I think we should keep going as well." Sakura swiftly consented to continue since she didn't want to be the only one to back out. "All right, then, but remember that our next opponent will probably be Jounin level, so I expect you to follow my instructions to the letter when the time comes. We still have a few hours of travel left before we reach the border, so let's continue." Without saying anything more, he turned around and began to walk down the road in the same direction they had been going before their unannounced stop. Kiba exclaimed in amazement, "Wow, look at the size of it." The biggest bridge Team 7 had ever seen emerged from the fog as they were traversing the channel that divided Wave from the rest of the mainland. Even Naruto, who had traveled the world and witnessed many of its wonders, was astounded by its immense size. The man who was escorting them across whispered, "Quiet, do you want Gado's men to hear you?" Sorry, Kiba said in a reprimanded tone. Fortunately, the remainder of the journey proceeded without incident, and Tazuna and Team 7 soon found themselves safely in the land of waves. "Is this fog typically present here, Tazuna-san?" Sakura inquired. "It's not that uncommon this close to the sea, though I will admit it's super foggy today," replied the elderly gentleman. When the group of ninja went to check what Kiba had seen, all they saw was a small snow rabbit with a kunai planted only an inch from its head. Unfortunately, just as Sakura had reassured herself that they would be able to make it to Tazuna's house without incident, Kiba let out a rather loud war cry and fired off one of his kunai. Sakura simply nodded her head and kept her eyes on the road ahead of them in the hopes that they wouldn't encounter any problems. "Look at what you nearly did, Kiba, you moron," Sakura yelled. "I'm going to knock him down with a powerful blow to the top of his head." But before she could deliver any more blows, she heard Naruto Sensei shout for him to get down. Fortunately, Kiba was already down, so it was easy for her to follow. A chilly voice said, "He, what do we have here, a bunch of snot-nosed brats, and here I was hoping for a decent fight." The genin quickly found the voice and saw a very tall, very well-built man standing on his enormous sword. Zabuza Momochi, a class missing nin from Kirigakure no Sato, also known as the Demon of the Bloody Mist, calmly said Naruto. "Well, I'll give you a chance to back off now since at least one of you Gaki has some potential. I'll let you go if you give me the old man." Naruto stepped closer to the missing nin and placed his right hand on the handle of his sword, saying, "That's not possible, we were hired to protect Tazuna-san, and I have yet to fail one of my missions and have no intention of starting now. Hey, you're a brave kid, but you can't really expect to use that little butter knife of yours to keep me at bay?" The only response he received was silence. "All right kid, you think you can play with the big boys, then so be it. Just don't start whining when I start cutting off limbs." He laughed, then grabbed his own sword and leapt down to the road, standing opposite Naruto. He then lunged, bringing his own massive sword down in a vertical slash, only to be stopped by the blade of a sword that, if it were possible, was even longer than his own. Now that he was standing in front of him, sword in hand, Zabuza realized exactly who he was up against and jumped back to get a better look at his opponent after finding himself held motionless. "Well, fuck me, if it isn't Konoha's own Angel of Death," Zabuza said. "Anywhere, I could recognize that sword. I must admit that you're much shorter than I had anticipated, but I suppose that just adds interest to the situation. Stay back and protect the bridge builder. Zabuza is a high A rank missing nin. He's far stronger than the Demon Brothers," Naruto said, glaring at him angrily, as this was not the first time someone had made a remark about his small stature. "I was wondering what had happened to them, but seeing you here I can guess I won't be seeing them again," replied Zabuza. Before charging Zabuza and locking blades, Naruto deadpanned, saying, "I wouldn't say that, seeing as it seems I will be forced to separate your head from the rest of your body soon." Zabuza laughed, then used the weight of his blade to throw Naruto back a little before charging with his own horizontal slash, only to be blocked again. "Normally, I would just create a thick fog and sneak up behind you and cut your head off or something, but to be honest, I've been wanting to lock blades with you for a while now, so let's have some fun," Naruto said, Your overconfidence will be your end, Zabuza. He then kicked him hard in the middle of his chest, sending him flying back. He had been shaken by that, and he had lost sight of his opponent for a split second. Unfortunately, Naruto only needed that brief running start before leaping into the air and bringing his sword down for a devastating blow that would have cut his opponent in half. Though the force behind the attack nearly caused him to drop his blade, Zabuza was only able to block it, acting entirely on instinct that he had developed over a lifetime of killing. Naruto pushed off with his own blade and landed silently on the dirt road a few feet away from the rival sword wielder. Grunt out Zabuza tried to project a confidence he didn't feel by saying, "Hey, is that all you got? I was expecting more from someone with your reputation." Despite the fact that neither of them had hit, it was obvious to him that the child was far quicker and more nimble than him. The air surrounding them became so heavy with murderous intent that even the genin standing far away could barely stand. "I simply didn't want to embarrass a fellow swordsman such as yourself. But if you wish to fight me at all, then that is your choice." Zabuza also became aware of another change at this time. His opponent's eyes were once glowing blue, but now they were blood red, as he had previously observed. He slowly began to circle his opponent, though it would be more accurate to refer to him as prey now, while holding his sword in a guarded stance. "Now would be a good time to pull out any jutsu you've been holding back. I would hate to finish our fight too soon. Cocky little Gaki, aren't you? But if you insist, Kirigakure no jutsu." All that was visible to everyone at once was an endless white blanket. Liver, lungs, spine, cervical artery, carotid artery, brain, kidneys and heat. "So many to choose from. Whatever will I do?" He chuckled. "Really now, you think that by simply taking away my sight that you've given yourself some kind of advantage?" asked he. "Stop trying to sound so confident. I don't care what you say, without your eyes you don't stand a chance. If you believe that so much, then come and get me," he chided. He appeared behind the younger fighter and muttered, "So be it." The only answer before the silver-haired Jounin vanished in a cloud of smoke, revealing that it was only a shadow clone, was predictable. Naruto's sword narrowly missed any vital organs, but before he could fully defend himself, a sharp pain exploded in his side. Zabuza, somewhat dazed but unfazed, cancelled his blatantly ineffective jutsu. Lucky shot. Before he recovered and charged once more, he threw his opponent back with the weight of his sword. In a sudden burst of speed, he said, "You are strong, Zabuza, but this fight is not going to be determined by who's the strongest." Then, he appeared inside Zabuza's guard and kicked him hard in the sternum. He vanished from view once more, reappearing behind him and slashing at his bare back. "After all, what good is your strength if you can't hit me?" he said. He vanished once more, this time resurfacing a few feet away from where he was struggling to stand. "Before I finish this, I just want to remind you that you were the one who wanted to fight me at my full power." After responding, he hefted his sword into a two-handed defensive stance and said, "Aha, I brought this on myself. Now shut her trap and let's finish this." With his own sword drawn back for a powerful horizontal slash, Naruto simply nodded his head in agreement before charging at the bigger swordsman. When the two swordsmen met, there was a loud clang of metal on metal that echoed throughout the clearing. Since both fighters were moving so quickly that none of the genin could keep up, it quickly became the only way to watch the match. The first thing any of the genin had said since the start of the match was, "Wow, I knew Sensei had to have been good, but this is unreal." Sakura and Sasuke could only nod in agreement when he said, "I mean, I can't even follow them anymore, they're moving so fast." All of their thoughts were quickly put on hold, though, when one of the surrounding trees stopped the bloody figure of Zabuza from flying over the lake where they had been fighting. "Damn kid, you really are the real deal. I can see why they call you the Angel of Death now. All I could see was a flash of black out there. Any lesser ninja wouldn't have even seen that. To think that a village of tree huggers could produce someone like you." He began to cough up blood. "You really should have been born in mist, they would have loved you." It wasn't really a question, it was just standard professional cutesy. "Perhaps, but we will never know now, will we? Now is there anything else? Because I would like to be on my way." His only answer was, "Just hurry the hell up already." Before he could deliver the final blow, 3 senbon zipped past Naruto and embedded themselves in Zabuza's neck. Naruto simply nodded his head and raised his sword. His eyes turned quickly and instantly focused on the hunter nin who was standing in a nearby tree. He jumped down, picked up Zabuza's sword and body, and scampered off after saying, "Thank you, Ninja-san. I have been hunting Zabuza-san for quite some time, and if it were not for you I imagine I would be hunting him still for quite some time." Naruto glared suspiciously at the location where the two had vanished before turning his attention back to Tazuna and his 3 genin. "Tazuna-san, how far do you lie from here?" He pointed down the road and said, Not far at all, just a half-hour walk that away." As he shut off the demonic chakra supply, his eyes returned to normal, and the constant killing intent vanished into thin air. He simply said, "Good." Unfortunately, Zabuza was a formidable opponent even though he didn't get hit, and he quickly passed out on the road after losing the demonic power coursing through his coils. "Sensei!" cried Sakura, startled and terrified. Sasuke, who was kneeling next to his now dead sensei, said, "It's okay, Sakura. He's just experiencing chakra exhaustion. He'll be fine in a day or two. Now get over here, Kiba, and help me get him to Tazuna's house." As he wrapped one of Naruto's arms around his neck and Sasuke wrapped the other around his neck, Kiba simply nodded. "Tazuna-san, if you could lead us to your house, our sensei really does need some rest," Sasuke replied. Before starting down the dirt road that led to his house, Tazuna simply nodded his head. Tsunami exclaimed, "Father, you made it," with relief. "I was so worried that Gato's men would. But it's not important, you're here and that's all that matters." As he entered the house and saw 3 children, one slung over the shoulders of the 2 boys, he said, "And it's all thanks to these super ninja here, if not for them I would never have made it home." She practically screamed, "My god, what happened?" "Naruto. Sensei just overexerted himself. He'll be fine in a day or two," said Sakura. At that moment, she became aware of the 2 beseeching glances she was receiving from the boys behind her. "Oh right. Do you have somewhere we could set him down? He's not as light as he looks." As she led them up the stairs to the spare room, Tsunami said, "Of course, you can use the spare bedroom upstairs. But did you say sensei? He can't be any older than you all." "Aha, but he's really strong. We're only genin," she said, gesturing to Sasuke and Kiba. "But Naruto. Sensei is already a Jounin." Tazuna came from the kitchen, followed by what could only be described as crazed laughter. "She's right, I saw him fight, and he is most definitely a super ninja. Now Gato doesn't stand a chance and I can finally finish my bridge and become famous all over the world as the best bridge builder around. Forgive my father, sometimes he gets a bit carried away. Anyway, you can put him in the spare futon here." Both boys unceremoniously dropped their unconscious sensei on the bed and said, "Thank you. Guess for someone who's only as old as we are, he sure as hell isn't light." When the new voice began speaking, everyone jumped. "It's the sword. The sheath may make it shorter but it doesn't do anything for the weight." "Sensei, are you awake?" all 3 genin's startled voices said. His only response before he passed out again was, "For the moment, but that's beside the point. I just wanted to tell you to rest up. I only have a week to get you ready to face Zabuza again, and I intend to make the most of it." What the hell did he mean by that? "Zabuza is dead. We saw that Hunter.Nin kill him, didn't we?" asked a perplexed Kiba. "I don't know either, but I think we should trust Sensei on this, at least until he wakes up again and can tell us himself," replied Sakura. Sasuke, who had visibly paled at the thought of the type of training they had to look forward to, said, "Sakura's right. We're just going to have to wait for him to wake up again, but if what he said was true then I'm not looking forward to the next week." The silver-haired Jounin woke up early the following morning. Although the fact that his sword was on the floor next to him was a fairly good hint, it took him a few minutes to realize that he was now in Tazuna's home and had not been taken by the enemy. He got out of bed slowly, putting one unsteady foot in front of the other, and walked slowly down to where he could hear Tazuna's voice, his genin's voice, and another voice that he vaguely remembered hearing in the brief period of time he was awake the night before. A startled Sakura nearly exclaimed, "Sensei? You're up," as Naruto descended the stairs to the kitchen. A half-conscious Kiba whimpered, "Gah, not so loud, Sakura, some of us are still just waking up." "Will both of you shut up? We still have things we need to talk about, and you two arguing like that isn't helping," Sasuke snapped in dissatisfaction. After a brief argument, Sakura and Kiba returned to their breakfast. As she served him his own food, she said warmly, "Hello, I'm Tsunami. I'm afraid we didn't get a chance to be properly introduced last night. Hello Tsunami-san. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, but you may simply call me Naruto, he replied. She smiled and said, well, it's nice to meet you, Naruto-san. With a hint of discomfort, he said, it's nice to meet you as well Tsunami-san, and thank you for the breakfast. You're welcome, but it's the least I could do after you saved my father yesterday. There's no need to thank me, I was merely doing what I was hired to do, he replied. She turned back to the morning dishes and said, in any case, I really do appreciate everything you've done for us. Naruto simply gave her a perplexed glance before he turned back to his genin and schooled his face. Now, last night is still a bit blurry, but I assume I mentioned something about Zabuza? Aha. You said something about only having a week to train us to be ready for him. But he's dead, isn't he? Asked a perplexed Kiba. No, it took me a moment to realize, but that hunter.nin only put him into a near-death state. Also, whenever a hunter.nin kills one of their targets, it's standard procedure to remove the head for identification and to burn the rest of the body. He clarified. That's why I said I only have a week to train up. Not only will we have to face Zabuza, but his accomplice as well, and I don't know how strong he is either. Now. Frightened Tazuna questioned, wait, so that guy with the giant sword is still alive? He attempted to allay some of the older man's anxieties by responding, hi, but you can relax. We still have at least a week until he'll be in any shape to fight, and with myself and my team here you have nothing to worry about. He stood up from the table and left through the back door after saying, now as I was saying, I only have a week to get you three in shape, so finish up here and meet me out in the forest. Only a few minutes later, the three genin were in the forest, standing in front of their sensei. No one responded to the question, now you all remember the tree walking exercise I had you complete? Because it wasn't actually a question. He turned around and walked deeper into the forest until they came to a small river. Then what I'm about to teach you is a more advanced version. Now follow me. After completing his explanation, he turned back the way they had come and started to walk. As I said, the principles of water walking are similar to the tree climbing exercise, but now you have to constantly change the amount of chakra you're using to stay above the water. Kiba said, hey sensei, where are you going? His only statement before vanishing from view, leaving the three genin alone, was, someone has to keep an eye on Tazuna-san. Even if Zabuza will not be a threat in the immediate future does not mean there are not others lurking out there. As he directed his chakra into his feet and plunged into the water, Sasuke said, well, this doesn't look so hard. However, he fell through the water's surface and ended up waist deep in frigid water. For all three genin, the day had been long and cold. Even Sakura was not in the best of moods at the end of the day, despite having done the exercise fairly well. Unfortunately, this was also the moment that Tazuna's grandson chose to show up. In an overly dramatic tone, he said, why do you try so hard? You're just going to die anyway. No one can stand up to Gato and his men, so you should just go back to wherever you came from. Well, you still can. The somewhat haughty response from Kiba was followed immediately by one of Sasuke's monosyllabic HNs. Speak for yourself, kid. I'm not going to let some little businessman kill me, so just stop talking about things you don't understand. Why should I? It's not like you know anything about pain and suffering. I bet you never had to suffer in your entire life, living all nice and happy. So why should I listen to you anyway? You all just going to die anyway. He was almost about to scream. Without even setting down his chopsticks to speak, Naruto said in an emotionless voice, that was a very ignorant thing to say, Inari-san. You should not assume things like that about people you do not know. I can assure you that although you feel as though you have suffered greatly, there are many people out there who would trade places with you in an instant. I can name at least 8 others off the top of my head. He said it without any emotion. Then he ran up the stairs and slammed his bedroom door. You don't know anything. You don't know how I've suffered. So don't tell me that there are other people out there that are worse off than me, he was saying. Tsunami apologized for her son's actions, saying, I'm so sorry about that, but he's never been the same ever since the incident. Sakura inquired curiously, it's all right, but what incident are you talking about? Tsunami then recounted the story of Kiza, how he was once regarded as the wave's hero, how he had grown to be Inari's father figure, how he had resisted Gato when he first began to annex their nation, and how Gato had killed him in front of everyone. After Tsunami was unable to continue the story, Tazuna concluded, I know it doesn't excuse his behavior, but at least you know why he's like this now." The story nearly brought Sakura to tears, and she said, "That's horrible." Even Sasuke had a rather pitying expression on his face as Kiba said, "Well, I'm defiantly going to be keeping my eye out for this Gato guy now." Sakura broke the silence a few minutes later, after the other two had gone to bed and the four of them were left alone in the kitchen. "Nay, Sensei, when you said that you could name at least 8 other people who would want to trade places with Inari-san, who were you talking about?" The other two watched with interest. I'm also curious as to who he was referring to when he made that statement. "The other Jinchuriki, of course, although I have not met them all yet, I can safely say that the others would gladly change places with just about anyone," was his sole reply. The always perceptive Sakura asked, "What are Jinchuriki, Sensei? I've never heard that word used before." As he poured himself a cup of tea, he explained, "It means the power of human sacrifice. However, in this context it refers to a person who contains one of the 9 biju." A startled Kiba questioned, "Wait, you mean there are people out there that have a demon inside them?" As he sipped his tea, he clarified, "Of course, biju are immortal. The only way to kill them, so to speak, is to seal them away." She didn't know if she wanted to hear the answer, so she left the question at that. "Wait, you said the other Jinchuriki before, does that mean?" All 3 genin were stunned into silence when Sakura said, "Very astute, Sakura. Yes, I am the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune." Despite his distant demeanor, they had begun to look up to the man as someone they should aspire to after training under him for a while. It was only a few moments before an exceptionally silent Kiba broke the stillness. "But you're not actually the fox, right? I mean, it's only sealed inside you, right?" Very impressive Kiba. Many people would, and for that matter have not, come to that conclusion. "Yes, you are correct. I am very much a separate entity from the fox, and although I can use its power, it has very little influence over my mind," he said after he had finished his tea. Though, after giving it some thought, it wouldn't make much sense for a demon to teach them ninja techniques, and if he was the fox, there was nothing stopping him from just completing the task he began when he attacked their village all those years ago. The 3 genin sighed with relief. Sasuke cautiously questioned, "So is that why you're so much stronger than us?" "That is part of the reason, yes. As well as the fact that I have been training to be a ninja since the time I was able to walk, as well as a few other things," he said at the end with a bit of discomfort. "It's no wonder he's so strong, to have all the power of a demon as well as being trained from an early age." Sasuke felt a little less jealous of his sensei after realizing that it was unfair to compare himself to someone who possessed demon power, regardless of what he did. Tsunami had set up a room for the 3 still shocked genin, so he said, "In any case, it is getting late and we have an early morning tomorrow, so let's get to bed." He then got up, put the teacup in the sink, and went past them and up the stairs. For the second time, Kiba wished he wasn't so obstinate in order to survive long enough to faint in the woods after yet another exhausting night. But this time, in contrast to the others, he was startled awake. With a start, he sat up and quickly looked around, fortunately finding himself in the clearing he had been using for his own training. But this time, instead of an empty clearing, one of the most beautiful girls he had ever seen was kneeling over him. All he could think to say was, hi." She merely gave him a smile before giggling slightly at his perplexity. She only said, "Hi," to greet him. Still a little dazed from waking up, he said, Not that I didn't mind the wake-up call and all, but who are you?" Her smile never left her face as she said, "Haku, you can call me Haku." With his head beginning to clear, he said, "Hi Haku-san, you can just call me Kiba." She got up and stood over Kiba-kun's prone body, saying, "Hello Kiba-kun, it's nice to meet you," he said anxiously, hoping she wouldn't take offense at his use of the chan suffix. Well, it's nice to meet you to Haku-chan." She simply gave him a smile and offered to help him up. Appreciative that she paid more attention to him than the girls at home, he took her hand and they were soon standing together. Despite the attractive girl, he was still a shinobi, and paranoia was a shinobi's best friend. Not that I don't mind the company, but why are you here? This is a pretty out-of-the-way place to take a walk and all?" he asked. Whatever suspicion Kiba might have had of her was totally dispelled when she replied sweetly, I was just out gathering medicinal herbs. Wave has a number of rare ones that can be used for all sorts of things." "Well, in that case, can I help? It's the least I could do for making sure I didn't oversleep back there," he replied sheepishly. She simply nodded her head and giggled once more. Sure, I wouldn't mind some company anyways. Now regretting not paying attention during the lectures they had attended on medicinal herbs back at the academy, he asked, so just what are we looking for? I have a few here, she said, taking a tiny green plant that resembled a fern out of her basket. As she gave him the plant, she said, here you can have this one. They supposed to grow in the shade. Looking at the plant, he said, right, no problem. Neither of them resumed their conversation until several minutes later. That thing on your forehead, that means you're a ninja, right? Replied she. He pointed his thumb proudly at his forehead and said, you mean my hite? Aha, I'm a genin of the leaf. She simply acknowledged with a smile and a head nod. Then her face took on a contemplative expression. If you don't mind my asking, when I found you out here it was because you were training too hard, correct? Well, some people might say you can never train enough, but I kind of lost track of time and well. His tone was somewhat sheepish. She simply gave a nod of comprehension. Then, if it's not too much to ask, why are you training so hard? He asked, somewhat perplexed. Well, to get stronger, of course. Why else would I be training? Then let me ask you this. Why do you want to get stronger? She inquired. His somewhat perplexed response was, well, so I don't end up as dog food on one of my awesome mission, I guess. With a very subtle frown that Kiba missed, she said, but what about your teammates, don't you want to protect them too? Well, but I don't really think Sensei is ever going to need me to protect him, but Sasuke and Sakura, my teammates, might someday. So I guess in getting stronger maybe I'll be able to help them sometime. He concluded with a pensive expression on his face. Haku's smile had returned by the end of his brief speech. That's good. I think that whenever we need to defend someone precious to us is the only time we can be truly strong, she replied with wisdom. He inquired, hoping to find out more about the girl in front of him. Hey, I guess that makes sense. Hey, do you have someone precious to you too? Hi, I do. He saved me when I was younger and ever since I've done whatever I could to help him along. In fact, the herbs you have been helping me collect are for him. He was injured recently and these will help him a lot, she said in a slightly sorrowful yet empathetic voice. Kiba exclaimed with enthusiasm, well, then what are we doing just standing here talking? Come on, let's find some more of those herbs. Haku simply gave him one of her kind grins and took his hand, guiding him deeper into the forest. When the two parted ways nearly 2 hours later, they both expressed the hope that they would cross paths again. The week flew by, and before long, the three shinobi were on the bridge covered in mist. Hey, I've been looking forward to this. I went easy on you last time, and I'll admit I underestimated you, but you can bet that's not going to happen this time. The voice of Zabuza emerged. Whether or not you held back last time is of no importance. The outcome will still be the same, only this time I will be sure to take your head off myself. Naruto responded with an icy tone. At that moment, the fog lifted, revealing Zabuza and his 100.nin partner. Don't get cocky, kid, you may be good, but I got years more experience under my belt. Besides, I don't have to kill you, just hold you off long enough for my partner here to deal with the old man. His voice remained icy as he said, you seem to forget that it's not just us here, Zabuza-san. What those snot-nosed genin hiding behind you, please, they wouldn't stand a chance. I can assure you I would not have brought them here if I did not think they were ready. He turned to his companion and said, fine, if you want to get you genin killed, that's no problem of mine. Go get them. He only said, hi Zabuza. Sama, before vanishing from view, only to be stopped by Sasuke halfway. He attempted to stab the hunter.nin with one of his kunai, but was thwarted when his opponent used a pair of senbon to halt his attack. I don't think so, you're going to have to go through me to get to our client. Hey, you are strong, but what are you going to do now? As he began to form seals with his single hand, he responded, this. When Sasuke leapt back to dodge the numerous ice needles flying at him, the only thing on his mind was, shit. Both Naruto and Zabuza were observing the fight nearby, naturally keeping an eye on one another. Your kid's good, but he doesn't stand a chance against Haku, said Zabuza. Hell, Haku could probably give me a run for my money. He turned to the other two genin and said, perhaps, but if that is the case then I will just have to take care of you quickly and finish off your apprentice myself. Before he turned back to Zabuza, he drew his sword and hurried him, saying, Sakura, stay there and guard Tazuna-san. Kiba, if you get a chance, try and help Sasuke with his opponent. Zabuza easily stopped the first attack. He pumped chakra into his arms and threw Naruto back, saying, I told you I wasn't going to hold back this time. Although it wasn't a question, the statement, you were using weight seals before, turned out to be a minor issue. As he charged, swinging his enormous sword as if it were a basic ninjutsu, he said, figured it out in one, it's been so long since I've had to fight anyone strong enough to warrant taking them off I almost forgot they were on there. After dodging the initial blow, Naruto leapt back, positioned his own blade defensively, and stopped the subsequent blow. He kicked him hard in the midsection after saying, you have gotten faster, I will give you that. But your form is too rigid. You've forgotten that your sword is only one of your weapons. As a result, he became distracted, which gave Naruto more time to plan his next move. The area of the bridge they were standing on was soon completely covered in fog, which was even thicker than when they had first met. Hey, alright kid, you really are the real deal, and as much as I would like to continue to lock blades with you, I have a job to do and you're in my way. Kirigakure no Jutsu. His voice was coming from everywhere once more, and Naruto was genuinely confused about what to do. You may have found me last time, but this fog is almost 10 times thicker than before. In fact, it's so thick that it even distorts sound. So let's see you find me now. Indeed, he possessed several jutsu techniques capable of eliminating Zabuza, or at least his mist, in a single blow. The issue was that the majority of them would also destroy a significant amount of the bridge that they were meant to defend. Sasuke was struggling against the enigmatic hunter. Nin, and Naruto was ensnared in the mist of Zabuza. The masked ninja said, you can't win, just give up now and I will spare your life. With a good assortment of tiny ice senbon protruding from his body, Sasuke simply gritted his teeth and charged once more. The hunter. Nin then began a series of hand seals, and soon both fighters were trapped in a dome of ice mirrors. Very well, I can see trying to talk you out of this is impossible, but Zabuza-sama still needs my help, so I will end this quickly. This is my ultimate attack, demonic ice crystal mirrors. You are now trapped, please surrender, you have no hope of winning now. He had never fought anyone to surrender except the demon brothers, so it was a slight exaggeration to say, I've never surrendered yet and I'm not about to start now. The hunter. Nin didn't need to know that. The Nin then melted into one of the mirrors behind him, and soon his reflection was in each of them. Very well, if this is how it must be, then the least I can do for you is make it quick. Shit, was a thought he kept having while battling the hunter. Nin. But it was never as powerful as it was now, as he was avoiding hundreds of senbon. The hunter. Nin could see that he was beginning to slow down after what could have been only a minute at most. The loud yell of dual-piercing fang, however, caused both Nin to stop in their tracks before the final blow could be delivered. Two miniature tornadoes then rushed in and collided with one another on the demonic mirrors. Regretfully, the mirror remained intact despite the combined force of two dual-piercing fans. Kiba, who was a little sleepy, said, UHG, what are those things made of? An irate Sasuke screamed, idiot, what are you doing for in here? Kiba snapped back, saving your sorry ass, that's what. You idiot, now we're both trapped in here, if you had wanted to help you should have attacked from the outside. Sasuke screams with rage. The last part was muttered under his breath. Well, hindsight 20/20 isn't it? But I'm in here now anyway, so we're just going to have to make do, you ungrateful ass. If you two are finished, I will give you another chance to surrender. Please, I do not wish to kill you, but if you continue to stand in my way I will have no choice. Kiba said, whatever, and turned to face Sasuke. So what's the plan? Sasuke could only shake his head at the folly of his teammates. Things had come to a complete halt with Zabuza and Naruto back together. Zabuza attempted to attack but was easily blocked, and Naruto was unable to find him in the fog. Zabuza snarled, clearly irritated, you know this is really starting to get annoying. He was actually spending too much time with both Kakashi and Kiba. He had never spoken so much during a battle before. Agreed, but this is your jutsu, so all you have to do is drop it and I can finish this. You'd like that, wouldn't YHA, but it's just a matter of time, you'll slip up and then I'll finish this, said a smug Zabuza. It was time for him to finish this, even though there was very little chance that he would make a mistake. All he could hope for was that the bridge remained intact. Great breakthrough. Wind release. Soon, winds that were nearly hurricane force blew across the bridge, sending Zabuza flying along with bits of cement and stone. He stood up shakily, and it wasn't until he felt Masamune sticking out of his stomach that he realized the silver-haired Jounin was now standing behind him. In an instant, the shorter Jounin was in front of him, and it was time to call it quits. Zabuza could only smile at the man who was going to put him to death. Things were not going as well for the Konoha Nins back in the Dome of Mirrors. Sasuke's Sharingan development had briefly given things hope, but by that point, both genin were already tiered from avoiding Senbon, not to mention that they weren't totally successful in that regard and were already beginning to resemble pincushions. Unfortunately, Sasuke surprised everyone in the dome by taking the hit for Kiba just as they had devised a plan to deal with the missing nin. The missing nin decided to take matters seriously and sent a volley of Senbon at Kiba. With sincere regret in his voice, the hunter.nin said, "I am sorry about what happened, but you can take solace in the fact that he died like a true shinobi." It came out as a whisper, "Shut up." An angry Kiba screamed, "Just shut up. He gave his life to protect me." At that moment, the enigmatic hunter.nin emerged from the mirror where he had been hiding. "I am sorry, but your friend need not die in vain. If you would just surrender, I will spare your life." Kiba exclaimed, "I don't think so. Get him, Akamaru." At that moment, the hunter.nin realized her error. She had been so preoccupied with the two genin that she had forgotten all about the little dog that accompanied Kiba everywhere. And a tiny tornado of biting, clawing dogs flew into her before she could turn to face the new threat, breaking her focus and ending her jutsu. He exclaimed, "Good job, Akamaru. Now let's finish this." Dual-piercing fang, before transforming into a miniature tornado and striking the hunter.nin together, Akamaru striking the nin straight in the face, causing the mask to crack, and Kiba striking the hunter.nin in the chest. He boasted, "Ha, let's see you get up from that." To say he was shocked would have been an understatement when he finally saw the hunter.nin unmasked after the dust had settled. All he seemed able to say was, "Haku? What the, what?" Even though she was barely able to stand, she defied her body's demands. "I'm sorry Kiba-kun, but I must do this, Zabuza." Sama needed the money from this mission to fulfill his dream. Kiba tried to make sense of the situation by asking, "But why are you with a guy like him anyway? I mean, you're nothing like him. So why do you have to do what he tells you to?" Despite the pain in her body, Haku smiled slightly and said, "Because Zabuza. Sama is my precious person. I would do anything I could to protect him and his dreams." In a desperate attempt to comprehend what was happening, Kiba questioned, "But why? I still don't understand why you would follow someone like that." She then told him about her past, including how she was born in Mizu no Kuni, how she had to kill her father, how she had lived on the streets until Zabuza found her and gave her a purpose in life, and about the blood purges and fear of people with Kekkei Genkai. "So you see, I am Zabuza. Sama's tool. But he has no need for a broken tool, so please kill me, don't make me feel what it's like to be like that again." She was beseeching him at this point. He screamed in exasperated frustration, What? No, it doesn't have to be like that, you can't just give up like that. Please, please." She was on the verge of tears. Even though Kiba and his teammate didn't get along, he was still a friend and teammate, and he didn't know what he was supposed to do after she killed him. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the memory of the girl he had picked herbs with that morning. At last, he reached down very slowly and took one of his kunai out of his hip pouch. In the hopes that she would say no, he asked, "Are you absolutely sure it has to be this way?" He only received a tearful nod in response. He pulled his knife back and was ready to stab the girl, who was crying, in the heart when a strong wind blew across the bridge, scattering dust and debris. They were both confronted by a battered Zabuza with a large gash in his side when the air finally cleared. The girl exclaimed, "Zabuza! Sama!" as she noticed that a largely uninjured Naruto was standing in front of him, his blade out and ready to impale the taller Jounin. At that moment, she made a snap decision. She turned to face Kiba, looked into his eyes, and did something that probably surprised her just as much as Kiba. She gave him a gentle peck on the cheek before running towards Zabuza, arriving just in time to see Naruto's blade. Therefore, rather than completing Zabuza, his sword was now implanted in Haku's chest, where she held it with both hands to prevent it from passing through her entire body. Unable to comprehend why the girl had been struck, Naruto simply gave her a strange look. Between coughing up blood, she said, I'm sore. Sorry Zabuza. Sama, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you anymore. He hefted his sword to make a horizontal slash that would pierce both Haku and Naruto, saying, "It's fine, Haku. You've done just fine." The only reason neither of them survived was because Naruto was able to leap back, drawing his sword in the process and bringing Haku to the ground. Regretfully, Zabuza exaggerated his strength and let his sword's momentum carry him away. Naruto said, "A little less icily than usual, you might as well just give up. You can't even hold your blade anymore." However, an army of bandits led by a small businessman emerged from the remaining mist before Zabuza could return with any response. A wary Zabuza, who already had a good idea of what was going to happen, said, "Gato, what the hell are you doing here, and what's with all the men?" He, the plans changed Zabuza. I planned on doing this from the start. Zabuza, I'm going to have you killed here, I never planned on paying you, Goto screamed with joy. The only issue was you. You were supposed to take care of everyone else, but I suppose the legend of the Demon of the Bloody Mist was just that, a legend. In all honesty, you look more like a cute little baby devil. I hired you missing nin to weaken the enemy, then take care of everyone with numbers, much more economical this way, he said. As they surveyed the army Gato had brought, all of the ninja on the bridge froze in place, silently attempting to assess their chances. "Oh look, it's that bitch that broke my arm. Too bad you killed her," Gato said to Naruto. "I bet we could have had all kinds of fun, after I had properly broken her in, of course." "Hey, stop bringing up Haku in that manner," Kiba shouted as he hurried to confront the thugs, but Naruto intervened to stop him. "Don't be foolish, we're outnumbered as it is, we don't need you rushing in as well," rebuked Naruto. Pretending not to hear him, Kiba said, "And you, how can you let them talk about Haku like that? She really cared about you, ya know." The lifeless reply from Zabuza was, "Shut up kid. Are you completely emotionless? You two were always together, weren't you?" Kiba needed to know the answer to his question, but he wasn't totally sure why he cared so much about this. "Shinobi like us are just tools. Her blood, not her, was what I desired. I used her just as Gato used me. As Shinobi," Zabuza responded, "that's just the way the world is. There are people who are used and people who use others." Are you serious?" More put off than he had ever felt in his life, Kiba asked. Zabuza remained silent in response. "No, I refuse to accept that. She truly loved you, so much so that she sacrificed her life to save yours. Do you really think that has no meaning for you? Are you really not feeling anything at all? Without having any dreams of her own, she sacrificed her life for you, so she died as a tool. It's simply too much." Between sobs, Kiba cried aloud, her tears streaming down her cheeks. "Youngster." Zabuza turned to Kiba and said, "You don't have to say any more. It hurt her to fight you, she fought for you guys as well as for me." Kiba, tears were streaming down his face. He turned to face Kiba fully and said, "Look kid, I want yo to do me a favor." Then, using all of his strength, he threw his sword to Kiba, who caught it but ultimately fell on his own under the weight of it. "I want you to protect Haku with this kid. I want you to look out for her." He looked down at the girl's prone body just a few feet away. "Ya know, I'm glad I fought you guys in the end, and you may be right, Shinobi are still human, maybe we can't become emotionless weapons. How can I protect her now that she's dead?" a now perplexed Kiba asked. Now that he was looking at her body, he noticed that her chest was still rising and falling. Zabuza smiled for the first time in a long time as he turned to face Gato and his men and said, "Now as for you, I think it's time you learned just why they call me Demon of the Hidden Mist." He then took two kunai from a compartment in his pants and charged the group of thugs. "Just remember to look out for her, and if anything does happen to her, you better believe I'll find some way out of hell and kick your ass." "Enough to kill them," Gato shouted as he withdrew to the rear of his army. Zabuza quickly demonstrated why he was an A-rank missing nin by stabbing and slashing his way through the army, leaving dozens of bodies in his wake, but he did not survive his suicide charge unharmed, and by the time he was standing in front of Gato himself, he had several swords, spears, and knives protruding from his back. The army of thugs then charged forward to kill the charging Zabuza with a war cry. Now confronted with the bloody specter of what could only be called a true demon, Gato screamed, "No, no, go away, leave me alone." He then kicked Gato's lifeless corpse over the edge of the bridge and sank the two bloody kunai deep into his neck, saying, "I don't think so, Gato. No, I plan on taking you to hell with me, and then we'll see whether I'm a true demon or just some baby devil." However, as soon as Gato's blood corpse sank into the depth of the oceanic strength gave out, he collapsed. The silence was broken for a few minutes by Sakura's loud scream, "Sasuke-kun, you're alive." All of the hired hugs simply stood around Zabuza's body, terrified to even approach him. But the joy was short-lived because it appeared that the commotion had also roused the other thugs from their slumber, and since their boss was no longer paying them, they began to gaze hungrily at the village. "Hey, don't forget about us just yet. You damn ninja killed our meal ticket, and now we're going to kill you and they're going to take what we want from that town over there as compensation," screamed one of the braver ones. The reminder of Gato's army then charged. Tazuna-san, I would recommend looking away. This is not going to be something you will want to see, Naruto said, glancing at the other people on the bridge. Tazuna naturally interpreted this as not witnessing their deaths, but he was an elderly man, and he would be damned if he didn't confront his death head on. He would soon be regretting that choice. After issuing his warning, Naruto turned to his genin and said, "Stay there, and if anyone makes it past me, it will be up to you to protect Tazuna." Naruto said, "I will only give you one chance to lay down your arms and walk away from here." After receiving a nod from his genin, he turned to face the charging thugs and, in typical shinobi fashion, vanished from view, only to Reaper in the center of the crowd. "Hee, you act like you're intimidating us, but you're only a child," one of the nearest thugs shouted. He closed his eyes and raised his sword in an offensive stance, saying, "Very well then." When he opened his eyes, they were a deep blood red instead of the eerie glowing blue. "You have made your choice." He then extended his free hand to the thickest concentration of men, who paused for a moment to try to figure out what the silver-haired child was doing when they noticed that the temperature was beginning to rise to uncomfortable levels. Flare. As the flames subsided, everyone strained to see what had happened, but the only thing that moved was the dust that the wind had picked up. Suddenly, a huge cone of fire rose out of the ground, encircling a large number of men, and their screams were already fading into nothing. Profiting from his opponent's surprise, he drove off once more, but this time, instead of just showing up somewhere else, he killed every man in his path. Arms, heads, and other body parts fell to the ground first, then the rest of the body as he swiftly moved through the crowd of men, slicing and hacking until no one remained. Not all of them were dead yet, but they would all soon be from either blood loss or infection because there wasn't a single body in that field of corpses that had all its limbs. All of the genin and one old bridge builder were left standing there in shock at the carnage they had just witnessed. "I believe you will be able to finish your bridge unmolested now, and I apologize for any damage that the bridge may have sustained during the battles of the day," he said, with blood dripping off the end of his sword but otherwise untarnished from the massacre he had just started. Tazuna was so impressed by the boy's skills and a little scared that all she could do was nod stupidly. He said, as usual, without showing any emotion that would have given away his thoughts on the matter, "You three grab Hiku-san and bring her back to the house. We'll let her heal up there." Kiba was in a rush to ensure the safety of his new friend and didn't bother to identify their sensei, instead rushing to the side of the fallen girl. He then returned to Tazuna. "Tazuna-san, I hope you don't mind the extra company, but I assure you that we as well as Hiku-san will be leaving as soon as the bridge is finished." Although Tazuna was still a little apprehensive about the man in front of him, he said, No problem. Bearing any major problems, it should only take a week at the most to finish, and I'm sure Tsunami will have no problem having another mouth to feed, especially now that Gato's dead and the price of food will be dropping." He gestured to his genin and said, "Very well then, I will stay behind to clean this up. They will be going back to your house to tend to Hiku." "And she's not dead?" a puzzled Kakashi asked. He didn't even turn to face his friend, he just said, "Yes." "Let me clarify. You not only allowed a possible adversary to survive, but you also took her back with you?" It was merely astonishment at the other nin's behavior, not accusation. She was no longer a threat to the mission, as I have stated, and this was made even less clear after Gato and Zabuza were killed. He had been explaining his mission to Wave for nearly an hour, and the fact that the Kakashi kept asking him the same question was beginning to irritate him. "I thought you would be happy or something. This seems very much like something you would have done in my situation," but if you prefer I could always rectify the situation and kill the girl. As for bringing her back with us, that was Kiba's decision and he was rather adamant about not leaving her there. No, it's okay. It's simply a little startling. After all, I've never heard of you leaving an enemy alive before. He joked, I was just concerned that you might be losing your edge. I think I've been spending too much time around you. I'm actually starting to understand your jokes, even if they aren't funny, Naruto said, shaking his head and continuing to gaze up at the night sky. My goodness, was that a clever retort? Then, I would have to agree that you have been around me far too much. Kakashi chuckled at the obvious chill that ran down Naruto's spine. Perhaps I should set up another company. Perhaps Enko would be willing to offer her services. I think I told you to never joke about that woman. I've seen a lot in my life, but she scares even me. It was a long, running joke for Kakashi, who had witnessed him in a fight almost a year ago and, given her personality, had developed what Kakashi had elegantly called a schoolgirl crush on him. She also had a habit of getting what Enko wants, usually in very painful and unconventional ways. To put it simply, Naruto had barely escaped her scheme to trap him in her apartment, and ever since he had adopted what most people would consider a healthy paranoia about anything related to her. He waved his hand and smiled into the night. As I can see you're now properly thankful that you have such charming friends as myself, I'll take my leave of you now, but remember everyone's getting together tomorrow, and with the Chunin exams just around the corner I'm sure the conversation will be engaging. Hokage. Sama, you wanted to see me? Kakashi asked, a little perplexed. The amused Sarutobi said, Ah, Kakashi, and only half an hour late, I'm honored. About that, you see there was this little old lady and well one thing lead to another and somehow I found myself locked in someone's basement. Thankfully I was able to extricate myself but alas I was already so far behind schedule that this was the earliest I was able to get here, he said with a straight face. In any case, I called you here just to ask a few questions, specifically about a mutual acquaintance of ours. The Hokage incredulously replied, right. Kakashi's back straightened out a little and he adopted a more formal demeanor after learning the purpose of the meeting. I take it that this mutual acquaintance would be Naruto, am I right? He inquired. Yes, and I can tell you that he's not in any trouble before you get defensive. Now that he has been employed as a Jounin Sensei, I was just curious about your thoughts on his mental health. You are still his closest friend, even though I am his cage. I imagine he is much more forthcoming with you than he is with me, answered the Hokage in a comforting tone. Kakashi appeared at ease. Hokage. Sama, of course. In response to your inquiry, I must state that this was the greatest thought you've had in a long time. I'm trying to say that it was just one of your many great ideas. He is now much more talkative and is even beginning to comprehend some basic emotions, even though he doesn't actually experience them. That's good to hear, Kakashi, the Hokage said, clearly relieved. To be honest, I wasn't sure if this would work, but if you're right, it looks like my worries weren't justified. That's good to hear, sir. However, if nothing else is available, Kakashi said. Oh, yes, you're dismissed, Kakashi. He waved his hand to dismiss the Jounin, maintaining the smile that had appeared on his face the entire time. The following day, they discovered that, despite the peculiar circumstances of their most recent mission, not much had changed, aside from the fact that they now had an additional sparring partner and that their training regimen had remained unchanged. So this is your regular training regimen? A curious and a little exhausted Haku asked. Aha, Naruto. Sensei is a real slave driver. Kiba muttered as he lay on the ground, nearly unconscious. Haku simply grinned at her new treasured companion and said, take a look at it this way. As she said this, her thoughts turned to her training under her late master and how he had pushed her just as hard during her own training. You can be sure none of the other Jounin teams are being pushed this hard, so you're bound to be much stronger than your peers, she said encouragingly. I suppose you're right about that. Kiba struggled to his feet and said, and it would be nice to show the rest of them just how strong I've gotten. Haku said with a hint of worry, I'm sure they'll all be impressed, but it's getting late and you look like you might fall asleep on the walk home. He agreed, saying, I guess, not to mention we have training again tomorrow, so I'll see you again tomorrow? Naturally, it's. Kiba and Haku both blushed at that, though Haku's blush was less obvious. I mean it's fun to be able to train with you and your team. And there aren't many other people who train at the same level I'm used to for that matter, she said quickly in an attempt to hide her previous slip. Well then I'll see you tomorrow. Kiba waved his hand and began to walk down the road toward the area of the village that housed the clan compounds. Personally, he thought their sensei was an insane workaholic, but if the girl said she liked training at this level, then so be it. She turned back toward the forest that surrounded the training area, and Haku simply stood there and waved back until he was out of sight. "I know you're there," she yelled. As the silver-haired man emerged from the trees to stand a short distance away from her, she received the response, "Of course you do, but the fact that I'm not even trying to hide my presence makes your accomplishment rather moot." In all honesty, after spending some time around the man, she still wasn't sure what to think of him. On one hand, he had spared her life and even brought her back to the village with him. On the other, she knew she was scared of him. It wasn't even the power he controlled, though she would be lying if she said that that wasn't part of it. It was also the way he acted. He was cold and ruthless even when there was no need to be. It also became obvious just from talking to him he either had no emotions or had suppressed them to such an extent that they may as well not have existed in the first place. And all that together lead her to the conclusion that if for whatever reason he ever felt she had become a risk, that he would not hesitate to kill her or anything else for that matter. "Well then, obviously there was something you wanted to see me about then, or else you would not have shown yourself," she said a little more coolly than she had planned, but it seemed that the Jounin in front of her paid it no mind. "You're right. I just wanted to let you know that, even though I can see why you chose to join my team, so that I won't think twice about removing any dangers that just so happened to surface." He said all of this calmly, without even a trace of threat in his voice. "And I assure you I am more than confident in my skills to handle said threats." "I see, and I can assure you that I mean no harm to either you, your team, or this village," he responded quickly. He then vanished back into the woods, and this time, despite her best efforts to use every sense, she was unable to pick up even the faintest hint of his presence. "I'm glad to hear that, and I suggest you keep this conversation in mind for the future, because this is your one and only warning." It was almost routine now, and to be honest, Naruto was beginning to look forward to seeing Kakashi and the other Jounin senseis. Kakashi still had to drag him along, and he was certain that the others were still a little unnerved by him, but he wasn't going to hold it against them because he still felt a little uneasy around them. "I take it that the Chunin exams are approaching soon?" Knowing full well that they were, Kakashi inquired, "Are any of you considering entering your teams?" "They've only been genin for a few months, Kakashi, to be honest." An irritated Kurana reprimanded him, saying, "You can't honestly think that any of them are ready for something like the exams." In his all-knowing voice, Kakashi said, Now Kurana. Chan, don't go speaking for the rest, besides just because you don't think they'll win is no reason not to enter them." Kurana simply huffed and turned his head away from the one-eyed man. "Well, I can't speak for the rest of you, but I plan on nominating my genin for the exam," Naruto said, feeling obligated to assist one of the few people he felt he might be able to call a friend. Naruto spent the majority of the time sitting there, as usual, sipping his sake. He said simply before turning back to his drink, "Even if they don't pass, it will still give them more real-life experience, something no amount of training can do. However, people frequently pass away during these tests." Kurana glared at him, a look she usually saved for Kakashi. "Don't you think you might be pushing your team too hard? They only have a few months of experience under their belts after all. Ninjas also frequently perish in the field. It is much better for them to practice in a somewhat controlled setting rather than out there without a proctor to save them." In addition, the short sliver-haired Jounin replied in his typical monotone, "If the only thing they learn from this exam is that we are all going to die sooner or later, then that's enough for me." Kurana appeared astonished, and the others were not much better. They all knew that all ninjas needed to learn this, but it was still a bit much to make a bunch of green genin learn it. "Don't you think it's a little excessive to risk your genin's lives in order to discipline them?" Kurana almost yelled. His straightforward answer was, "I'm confident that they can survive whatever the exam might throw at them." Kurana was unable to explain herself once more, so she just sighed and looked at the other two Jounin senseis. "Well." Gue and Asuma simply exchanged glances before Asuma questioned, "Well, what?" in bewilderment. She gave him a frustrated look and asked, "Are you going to enter your genin or not?" she inquired. "Oh, I see. Okay, so. Ah." He flinched at the end, expecting his off-dot and on again girlfriend to slap him on the back of his head, but when no blow came, he looked up to see the one thing he was hoping to avoid. She was just sitting there giving him a heated glare, and he knew that he was not going to get laid again anytime soon. You see, Naruto-san does have a point, and I might have already told them that I was going to enter them. The silent message between the enraged Kanonichi and the chain smoking Jounin sitting across from him nearly made Kakashi laugh, but it was short. Lived as Gui seemed to feel compelled to interrupt it by speaking, as if he could sense his eternal rival's amusement. Yash, I realize that it's time to allow my genin to take part in this most youthful of competitions and enjoy their springtime of youth. All of you will now be able to witness how brilliantly my youngest student's youthful flames will shine. When he saw that no one else was even listening to him, he abruptly stopped talking. In fact, if they don't make Chunin, I'll do 500 push-ups. If I can't do that, I'll run around the village 10 times on my hands. If I can't, well then Karana-chan, it seems that your team will be the only ones not participating this year, said a smug Kakashi. After slamming her head against the table, Karana got up, placed a bunch of bills on the table, and turned to go, complaining that all men were idiots or something similar. After watching her go, Kakashi turned to the other players and said, "It appears that every rookie team will be playing this year." Training had been cruel to them all once more. All of them were reminded of their first week under their sensei, even though it seemed like they had been pushing themselves more recently than usual. Kiba, who had been swinging his sword in various kates for the previous 3 hours, whimpered, "UHG, I can't feel my arms." After nearly fainting on the ground, Sakura said, "Stop whining, Kiba. I'm too exhausted to even go over there and shut you up." Like his two teammates, Sasuke was experiencing the after-effects of the training day, but he was unwilling to express his displeasure. The emotionless voice behind them said, "Well done all of you," he said, pausing to think about how he would phrase it. "In fact, seeing as you have all progressed so far from when you first started, I've decided that you all deserve a reward." They had all turned their attention to that. It was nearly impossible to get the man to commend them, but to receive a reward? That had never occurred before, and to be honest, it made them all nervous. Especially since none of them knew exactly what the man would think of as a reward. They could have thought it was a more intense training regimen. He actually smiled a little when he saw the terrified expressions on his genin's faces. Though it was brief and fleeting, he discovered that he had experienced amusement, a feeling he did not often experience. Since he didn't find anything amusing outside of a good fight every day, he decided to play with them more frequently. He observed as the expressions of fear changed to ones of relief, then curiosity, and finally excitement. "As I was saying, due to the progress you have all made, I have nominated you all to participate in the upcoming Chunin exams. After saying, they'll be held at the academy in 3 days. I would suggest you rest up until then." He gave them their entrance papers and turned to leave for the town. As always, the silence was short-lived, as the 3 genin gazed down at the slips of paper in their hands for more than a few minutes. An exuberant Kiba exclaimed, "Hell yha Akamaru. Now we can show everyone just how awesome we really are." The other 2 genin were startled out of their reverie by their teammates' sudden noise, and even though neither of them spoke up as loudly as Kiba, it was clear that they were all thrilled about the chance to take part in something similar to the Chunin exams. For the 3 hopeful Chunin, the next 3 days passed swiftly, and before long, they were all standing outside their former academy. With Akamaru adding some loud yips, an excited Kiba asked, "So you guys ready to kick some ass?" Sakura and Sasuke merely rolled their eyes at their friend's fervor. Even though they didn't express it, they were both tacitly supporting the annoying teammate. A dejected Kiba hefted his enormous sword onto his shoulder and began to make his way toward the academy's front doors, saying, "You two are no fun. Now let's go before we were late." Sasuke and his female teammate flowed safely behind, and he joked, "Whatever you say, dog breed, just be sure you don't accidentally cut someone's head off on the way." As he marched up the stairs leading to the exam room, a rather irritated Kiba said, "Honestly, it happened once, just once, and still you won't let me hear the end about it. Besides, unless I'm mistaken, your head is still firmly attached to your shoulders, so no harm, no foul." Sasuke felt the subtle effect of a genjutsu take hold in his chakra system, so whatever retort he was about to say died in his throat. He glanced at his teammates who had also stopped and saw that they had also realized they were now experiencing some sort of delusion. "Just play it cool for now, it might be part of the exam or something. Just keep any eye out for anything odd and play along," he said. Both merely nodded before proceeding up the stairs to what appeared to be the third floor. All three realized the situation instantly, and someone accidentally displayed a genjutsu over the signs, giving the impression that they were on the third floor rather than the second. Kiba pointed to a sizable crowd gathered outside a door marked 301 and sneered, "Look at all those morons, even I could make a better genjutsu than that." Gazing out over the genin crowd, Sasuke whispered, "Shut up you moron, the more people down here the less competition in the rest exam." The three of them then stealthily slipped past the gathered genin and up the stairs to the third floor, saying, "Now let's keep going. I don't want to attract their attention." Once they realized they were supposed to cheat, the first portion of the test had been nearly too simple, at least for Sasuke and Kiba. Sakura was able to answer the majority of the questions by herself. In any event, the three of them were now outside a sizable forest that was encircled by a tall fence with razor wire on top. The proctor yelled, "All right, Gaki's listed up for this section of the test. Just in case some of you dimwits have forgotten, I'm Anko Mitarashi Proctor for this part of the exam. And this lovely patch of hell on earth behind me is Training Ground 44, also known as the Forest of Death. Over the next 5 days you're all going to be calling it home. Anyways, the next part of the exam is simple. Each team will either be given a heaven or earth scroll. All you have to do to pass is show up at the tower in the center of the forest with one of each. How you get the other scroll is up to you." She concluded by shrugging her shoulders and indicating she didn't care what they were. Even the most seasoned shinobi were deterred from raising their hands by the deadly intent she was projecting. As for rules, there really aren't any. Just don't open the scrolls until you're in the tower. There's a time limit of 5 days and you need everyone on your team still in one piece to pass. Other than that, you little snots can do whatever the hell you feel like. Now, any questions? No questions? Good. Now I'll be handing out a waiver. Don't bother reading them. All they say is that if you end up a bunch of red smears on the forest floor, I can't be held accountable. Anyway, once you're done with that, take them to that tent over there and exchange them for you scroll. After that, go pick a gate and wait for the signal. You get all that? Good. Now hurry the hell up," she shouted. Kiba whispered to his teammates, "I'm not sure if I should be scared or turned on." Sasuke simply gave his horndog of a teammate a rolling look. But Sakura chose to express her disgust more viscerally, and soon Kiba was lying face down on the ground with a big lump on his head. They had encountered their first opponent in a matter of hours. Fortunately, he was not only by himself, but he was also awful at the henge. Regretfully, he was without a scroll. As they ran quickly through the trees, Kiba remarked, "Jez, what a moron. I mean, what kind of loser can't even do a prober henge?" Sasuke commented on the fact that Nin had used a genjutsu on Kiba when he went to use the restroom, saying, "This coming from the guy who got suckered by a simple genjutsu." "Hey, that could have happened to anyone," exclaimed a poor Kiba. Sasuke simply said, "HN," in response, then picked up his pace a little to make his point. However, a strong windstorm quickly cut them off, with the unfavorable consequence of sweeping Kiba from their branch and into the underbrush of the forest. Sakura asked in confusion, "What was that?" Sasuke activated his Sharingan and began searching their surroundings for any enemy Nin, saying, "I don't know, but be on guard." As he staggered out of the underbrush, Kiba cried out in confusion, "Gez, what the hell hit me?" to his two teammates. However, Sasuke quickly interrupted him by throwing several shrunken at him. "Hey, what the hell?" Sasuke calmly remarked, "At least you can do a proper henge, but you forgot about Akamaru." The fake Kiba laughed and said, "Kukuku, I see I can't get anything past your eyes, can I, Sasuke-kun?" Sasuke simply gave the other shinobi a snort. "Whatever, I can tell you're lone, so surrender your scroll now and we won't kill you." He took out an earth scroll and asked, "Oh, this?" His head leaned back, and he swallowed the scroll whole. "Well, why don't you come and get it?" he said. Sasuke and Sakura were both immobilized after witnessing the strange shinobi actually devour his scroll. He vanished from view and then reappeared in front of Sasuke, saying, "Oh, what's this? Are you shy, Sasuke-kun? Well, in that case." He then delivered a devastating blow to Sasuke's stomach, sending him hurtling back into one of the numerous trees that comprised the Forest of Death. "I'll introduce myself first. I expected much more from the ousted Uchiha genius. Tut-tut, Sasuke-kun. Sakura, stay back and act as support, I'll handle this guy." Sasuke simply grunted before gathering himself. Then he activated his Sharingan and began kicking and punching the fake Kiba. Kukuku. Yes. Sasuke.kun. That's more like it. As he skillfully sidestepped every one of Sasuke's blows, he said, "Unfortunately, you are no threat to me. However, if that's all you have to show MW, I'm afraid that I simply have no use for you." With that, he threw a palm thrust into the young Uchiha's sternum once more, sending him to the ground. Sasuke glared up, his eyes growing angrier by the moment. He leapt back and ran through several hand seals before yelling, "Fire style!" Immortal Phoenix Fur, and 6 medium-sized fireballs erupted from his mouth in the direction of the startled Nin. But in an instant, the other Nin sped through several hand seals, and a huge wall of water erupted from the earth, putting out all the fiery balls that were aimed at him. However, a series of incredibly thin wires began to pierce his skin just as the fake Kiba was about to gloat once more. In a matter of seconds, he was pinned to one of the trees directly behind him. With his opponent helplessly tied to a tree, Sasuke ran through the hand seals for his favorite jutsu, Fire Style. Grand Fireball. A huge ball of fire struck the tied up Nin and burned so intensely that it nearly melted the wires supporting the other Nin. "Not so smug now, are you?" said a winded Sasuke. When the other Nin's screams had stopped, he cancelled the jutsu with a layered but contented smile, but as he got close to the dead Nin's body, to his horror, it instantly turned to mud. Sasuke's blood ran cold as he turned to face the voice's owner. Early in their training, their sensei had given each of them a bingo book, and he had taken to memorizing the details on all the S-rank missing Nin, especially on his brother. As a result, he now realized that he was completely screwed. "Oh yes, very impressive. In fact, you have surpassed all my expectations, and for that I think you deserve a present." "Oh, is that Sasuke.kun I recognize in your eyes? I'm happy to see that my name still inspires such fear among the younger generation," a beaming Orochimaru said. However, before he could take any action, a huge sword shot out of the trees and embedded itself in the tree where the snake Sannin had been standing. "As I mentioned earlier, you have impressed me enough that I have given you a very special present. I got that to work at last. Hell YHA, an ecstatic Kiba shouted from his perch atop the blade. "What on earth are you doing, Kiba? Do you not recognize that person? We must leave this place," Sasuke shouted. "They also referred to me as a fool. Do you really believe that these guys will simply let us go?" Kiba questioned incredulously. "Fine, but if we're even going to survive this, then we're all going to have to work together." Kiba was correct, despite his reluctance to admit it. It was clear that the Sannin was here for a purpose, and it seemed improbable that if that purpose involved them, the man wouldn't simply let them flee. "Oh, and do you honestly believe that I will initially permit you to do that?" Orochimaru, who had suddenly materialized behind their pink-haired teammate, was asked. "Sakura," both boys shouted, but it was too late. She was knocked unconscious by a sharp blow to the back of her head. However, it was only because of his training with Naruto Sensei that Kiba was able to sense the sword strike that had been aimed at his abdomen. Kiba leapt down, swiftly wrenched his sword from the tree, and ran frantically to their downed teammate. Orochimaru, holding a long double-sided sword, stood in front of him, looking slightly surprised. A mere genin being able to block my blade, how unusual." That was all he said before he swung his sword idly at Kiba's head, making the younger Nin defensive. "But do you really think that you stand any chance against me?" he asked. Gradually increasing the speed at which he swung his sword until, at last, Kiba was left with no choice but to keep all of his limbs. With a sudden surge of strength and speed, Orochimaru pierced Kiba's defenses and delivered a devastating slash from his right shoulder to his left hip. Not deep enough to kill, but more than enough to render the dog Nin immobile. "You know, it's so rare that I come across someone who can give me a proper challenge in a sword fight. It's almost a shame to have to end this so quickly, but alas, I do have a prior engagement to see to, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to end this now. Now that there are no more distractions to worry about, we can finally get down to business," the snake Sannin said, turning back to the Sharingan user. Orochimaru smiled as he continued. If he was going to die, he was going to do it like a true shinobi because, after all, he'd a damned if he was going to run from a fight like he had done when he had run from Itachi all those years ago. He may have been confident in his abilities, but he wasn't stupid. He knew that he was screwed, and he was not going to win. The only reason he and his teammates had survived this long was because the bastard had been playing with them. "Are we, Sasuke? Are you still up for more?" Sasuke's eyes widened as the nin in front of him crumbled into a pile of mud as he said, "Unfortunately, I am pressed for time, so I'm afraid I won't be able to play with you anymore." He did not have time to be shocked, though, because almost immediately after the mud clone in front of him vanished, a sharp pain shot through his neck, and soon after, his entire world was in agony. The voice of the man who had just bitten him could be heard faintly just before he was swallowed up by the blackness of unconsciousness. "Sasuke-kun, this is just a small sample of the power I can give you. And if you make it through, feel free to come find me, and I'll help you reach your full potential." With that, the darkness completely overtook him, and he lost all knowledge.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.